Hello everyone, and welcome back to Spook Speaks. I know many of you tune in to these videos to help you to sleep, so I thought it would be a fun idea for everyone to share where you're listening from in the world. Feel free to drop a comment below, and if you enjoy the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now get cozy and relaxed. Let's begin. Story 1, I should have turned back the moment we saw that sign. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Rusted over, barely legible, clinging to a crooked post. But, as usual, curiosity got the better of me. I'm not saying it was all my fault, but I was the one who insisted we keep going. Now I'm the only one left. The sun was already dipping behind the hills when we first saw the village. It wasn't on the map. At first, I didn't even believe it was real, just a silhouette through the trees, houses standing like crooked teeth in the distance. After hours of hiking, my legs burned and my throat was dry. It was too tempting, too perfect. A village in the middle of nowhere? It had to have water, maybe food. It didn't look abandoned, at least not from where we stood on the ridge. I was so wrong. I'm telling you, this place isn't on the map, Ethan said, folding the paper back up, his eyes flicking toward me. What kind of village doesn't show up on a map? I shrugged. A forgotten one, maybe? No one just forgets an entire village, Sam, said Holly, wiping sweat from her forehead. She was always the cautious one, the voice of reason when I would get reckless. I should have listened to her then. The others were already inching closer to the edge of the ridge, their curiosity piqued. Chris, always the boldest of us, grinned and motioned us forward. Come on, guys, it's probably just some old farming town. Could be cool. Maybe we'll find one of those old school inns or something. Ethan muttered something under his breath, but eventually he folded the map and stuffed it into his backpack. We all followed Chris down the steep path toward the village below. I kept stealing glances at the skyline. There was something off about it, the way the roofs seemed to sag and lean as if the houses were tired of standing. The trail wound down through dense trees until it opened into the village's outer limits. The first house we passed was made of wood, its paint peeling and windows dark. It wasn't old in the charming, rustic sense, more like it had been abandoned for years. We walked by without stopping, an eerie silence settling around us. Anyone else getting a weird vibe? Holly asked, her voice hushed. She clung to Ethan's arm, scanning the surroundings with unease. Just old, Chris said, brushing her concern off. Probably a farming community that just died off. Maybe, Ethan added, though his tone wasn't convincing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The village looked desolate, yet not in the way a place slowly dies over time. It felt like people had left in a hurry. A stack of firewood sat by one house, untouched and gray with dust. An old bicycle leaned against another, its tires deflated. It was like the village had been frozen in time. We kept walking, winding our way deeper into the narrow streets. My unease grew with every step, but there was no going back now. A single sign, hanging crookedly on a post, caught my eye. Welcome to Glasto. I don't like this, I whispered, but no one heard me. We found the town square soon after. If you could call it that. It was more like an empty space in the middle of the buildings with an old fountain in the center. The water had long since dried up, leaving only a cracked basin. In the fading light, everything looked gray, washed out like a photograph left in the sun for too long. Where is everyone? Holly's voice was barely a whisper now, her grip tight on Ethan's arm. Chris stopped and spun around, arms wide as if presenting the village to us like some grand prize. What did I tell you? It's abandoned. People probably packed up and left a long time ago. I stepped closer to the fountain, feeling a strange pull toward it. Something was carved into the stone at the base, faded and worn with time. I squatted down, running my fingers over the rough surface. It was a name. I could just make it out in the dim light. A. Rourke. Below the name, another line, for our beloved lost to the dark. What are you looking at? Ethan called from a few feet away. Just something weird. I think this fountain's a memorial. For who? Holly asked, her voice closer now. I shrugged, standing up. I don't know. There's a name, but the rest is faded. We stood there for a few more minutes, the silence weighing heavier by the second. I could tell the others felt it too. The air was thick with it, a strange pressure that made it hard to breathe. It was more than just the quiet. It was like the village itself was watching us. "I think we should leave," Holly said, her voice trembling slightly. "This place is—" She was cut off by a sound, a soft creaking noise that echoed through the empty street. We all turned in unison, eyes scanning the dark windows and doorways. My heart was pounding now, and I could see the same fear reflected in their faces. "What was that?" Ethan whispered. "No idea," Chris muttered, his bravado fading. The creaking came again, louder this time, like a door swinging open on rusty hinges. It was followed by a soft whispering sound, too faint to make out but unmistakably human. "We're not alone," I said, my voice barely audible. The creaking sound sent a chill crawling up my spine. It was subtle at first, almost as if the wind was brushing against an old door. But there wasn't any wind. Everything was unnaturally still. The trees surrounding the village barely rustled, and the air felt stagnant. "I don't like this," Holly whispered, gripping Ethan's arm even tighter. I could see her knuckles whitening from the pressure. We all exchanged uneasy glances. Chris, normally so brash, looked pale, his confidence fading with the last bit of sunlight. The village now loomed darker around us, the shapes of the houses like looming shadows, the windows dark and reflective like empty eyes. The sound came again, this time distinctly from one of the houses. It was closer now, the slow creak of a door being pushed open. Then that whispering. Low, barely audible, but definitely human. I couldn't make out the words, but it was as if someone, or something, was calling us, beckoning us to come closer. "Maybe it's someone still living here?" Chris offered, but he didn't sound convinced. His eyes flicked nervously to the house from where the sound came. "No way," Ethan muttered. "Look at this place. No one's been here for years." I took a step toward the house, trying to get a better view. It was one of the larger ones, with a sagging roof and wooden slats rotting in place. The door was slightly ajar now, swinging slowly, as if nudged by an unseen hand. "Sam?" Holly's voice was tight, strained with worry. "What are you doing?" "I'm just checking it out," I said, but my own voice didn't sound steady. Still, curiosity pulled me forward, despite the creeping dread that clung to my chest. The closer I got, the more I felt like something was watching me. It was irrational, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in this village. The whispering had stopped now, and the only sound was the low groan of the door as it rocked back and forth. I stopped just a few feet from the entrance, peering inside. The interior was dark, the last bit of daylight barely penetrating the threshold. I could see what looked like a dusty table and chairs, the remnants of someone's long-abandoned life. Dust motes floated in the air, suspended in the fading light like tiny ghosts. But there was something else, a shadow, darker than the rest of the room, shifting in the corner. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, my heart thudding in my chest. "Sam, come back," Ethan called from behind me. His voice was tense, but I was frozen in place, staring into the darkness. The shadow seemed to move, almost as if it were alive, slithering along the floor toward the door. My throat tightened, and a cold sweat broke out along the back of my neck. Something was definitely in there. "Sam!" Chris shouted this time, snapping me out of my trance. I took a step back, my heart hammering now. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like if I stayed there any longer, something would reach out and drag me inside. I turned on my heel and hurried back to the others, the cold dread still gripping my chest. "What the hell was that?" Ethan asked, his voice an anxious whisper. I don't know," I stammered, glancing back at the house. The door was still swinging, slow and steady, as if it had a life of its own. The shadow was gone now, or at least hidden deeper within the house's murky interior. Chris shook his head, looking paler than I'd ever seen him. "Maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all." "You think?" Holly hissed, her eyes wide with fear. "I told you this place felt wrong." She wasn't wrong. Everything about the village felt off. The air was heavy, suffocating, and there was that nagging feeling that we were being watched from every corner. But from who, or what? "We should leave," I said finally, my voice shaky. "We've seen enough, let's just go." I turned to head back toward the way we'd come, but as I did, something stopped me cold. The path was gone. Where there had once been a clear trail leading back into the forest, now there was nothing but a thick wall of trees, tangled and overgrown as if it had been that way for decades. It didn't make sense. I spun around, my heart racing. "Guys, where's the path?" I managed to say. The others turned too, their faces mirroring the panic that was quickly setting in. Chris jogged a few steps forward, where the path had once been, but there was nothing there. He cursed under his breath, scanning the tree line, his eyes wild. "This isn't possible," Ethan muttered, stepping closer to the trees. "We came this way. The path was right here." "It's like it vanished," Holly whispered, her voice trembling. "How can a path just disappear?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. We were trapped, and the village seemed to know it. The next few minutes were a blur of panic. We fanned out, searching for any sign of the trail that had led us into the village. But no matter how far we wandered, all we found were more trees, dense and twisted, forming an impenetrable barrier. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed the path. By the time we regrouped near the fountain, the sun had completely set, casting the village in a deep, oppressive shadow. The only light came from a pale, eerie glow in the sky, what little moonlight filtered through the thick canopy of trees. "We're lost," Holly said, her voice cracking with fear. "We're trapped here." "Calm down," Ethan tried to say, though his own voice was shaking. "There's got to be a way out. We just need to think." But there was no calm to be found. Not anymore. The village seemed to be closing in on us, the houses looming taller, their broken windows like hollow eyes watching us with silent malice. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting. "What the hell is this place?" Chris muttered, pacing back and forth. "It's like a damn nightmare." I wanted to reassure him, to say that everything would be fine, that we'd find a way out. But I couldn't, because deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong with this village, something beyond what any of us could explain. As if on cue, the whispering started again. Low, insidious, like a voice carried on the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was coming from the houses, from the dark windows and open doors. Multiple voices now, all murmuring at once, their words unintelligible but filled with a malice that made my skin crawl. Holly let out a small cry, backing up against Ethan. Chris froze, his eyes wide, scanning the empty streets for the source of the voices. "We have to get inside," I said suddenly, my own voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know why, but the thought of standing out in the open felt like a death sentence. The village had eyes. I could feel them, all around us. "What?" Ethan turned to me, confused. "Inside where?" "I don't know. Anywhere. We can't stay out here." As if to emphasize my point, the voices grew louder, more distinct, and then out of the corner of my eye I saw movement. A figure, tall and shadowy, standing in the doorway of one of the houses, and it was watching us. The figure in the doorway was still. It was hard to tell if it was a person or just a shadow, but every instinct in my body screamed danger. My legs felt like jelly, rooted to the spot, but I forced myself to move, to tear my eyes away from whatever was watching us. "Sam," Holly hissed, her voice sharp and panicked. "What the hell are you staring at?" I pointed shakily to the house across from us. "There's something, standing there." Everyone turned to look, but by the time they did, the doorway was empty. The figure was gone. "What?" Ethan frowned, squinting at the darkened entrance. "I don't see anything." "I swear it was there," I insisted, feeling a cold sweat break out along my spine. "It was watching us." Chris exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "We're all on edge. This place is messing with our heads." "Maybe," I muttered, though I wasn't convinced. I knew what I saw, and whatever it was real. The village wasn't just abandoned, it was alive with something that was watching us and waiting. Holly was trembling now, her eyes wide as she clung to Ethan. "We need to get out of here, now." "But the path is gone," Ethan reminded her, though his own voice was tinged with growing fear. "We have no idea where we even are." "Then we find shelter," I said, my voice steadying as I fought to think clearly. "We need to stay together, stay inside until morning. Maybe things will be clearer then." The others nodded reluctantly. No one liked the idea of spending the night in this cursed village, but we didn't have a choice. The darkness was closing in, and I had a gut feeling that something far worse was coming if we stayed out in the open. Chris pointed to a house just a few steps away, its door partially ajar. "That one looks stable enough." It didn't, not really, but it was better than standing out here waiting for whatever lurked in the shadows. We moved toward it as a group, huddled close as the whispering continued to swell all around us. My breath quickened, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see more figures emerging from the darkness. Every window seemed to have a pair of invisible eyes, watching us, judging us. The house groaned as we pushed open the door. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and a musty smell hit my nose. The floor creaked underfoot, the wooden boards brittle and worn with age. It was dark, but I could make out the vague shapes of furniture. A table, chairs, a small stove in the corner. Everything was covered in a layer of grime, like no one had lived here for years. "We should check the other rooms," Ethan suggested, his voice low. I nodded, and we split up cautiously, each of us poking around the corners of the small house. Holly stayed close to me as we crept toward what looked like a bedroom. The door was partially closed, and I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The hinges squealed, and the door swung inward to reveal a small, cramped space with a single bed against the far wall. The sheets were still rumpled, as if someone had left in a hurry. A mirror hung crookedly on the wall above a dresser, its surface cracked and cloudy with dust. "This place gives me the creeps," Holly whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," I agreed. "It feels wrong." I stepped into the room, scanning it for any signs of life, but everything was still, eerily still. The mirror caught my attention, its surface distorted by the cracks that ran through it. I approached it slowly, and when I looked into the reflection, I felt my blood run cold. Standing behind me in the doorway was the shadowy figure. My heart lurched into my throat, and I spun around, but the doorway was empty. Nothing was there. "Sam, what is it?" Holly asked, her voice barely audible. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. I thought I saw something in the mirror." "What? What did you see?" "I don't know," I lied, not wanting to scare her any more than she already was. "Just, I don't know. Maybe it's the dust messing with my head." Holly didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. We backed out of the room, returning to the others in the main area. Chris and Ethan had found some old candles in a drawer and were struggling to light them with a box of matches they'd found. "Did you find anything?" Ethan asked, striking another match. "Just more dust and creepy vibes," I muttered, glancing around the room nervously. "This place feels off." "Yeah, no kidding," Chris said, blowing out a plume of dust as he struck another match. "But at least we have some light now." The candles flickered to life, casting long shadows across the room. It was a small comfort, but it didn't erase the growing sense of dread that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something that didn't want us here. "Let's just sit tight until morning," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Maybe when the sun comes up, we'll be able to find the path again." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The village didn't seem like the kind of place that played by the rules of the natural world. There was something else at work here, something darker and more sinister. We huddled around the flickering candles, the silence pressing in on us. Outside, the whispering had faded, replaced by a thick, oppressive stillness that felt even worse. It was as if the village was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Do you think we're safe in here?" Holly asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's better than being out there." We sat in uneasy silence, the weight of the night pressing down on us. Every creak of the house, every flicker of the candlelight felt like a threat. Time dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. And then, without warning, the candles flickered violently, the flames sputtering as if hit by a sudden gust of wind. But the air was still. There was no breeze. "What the?" Chris started, but his words were cut off by a sudden, loud bang from the back of the house. It was as if something had slammed into the wall with tremendous force. We all jumped to our feet, the candles flickering dangerously as we stared at each other, wide-eyed. "What was that?" Ethan whispered, his voice tight with fear. Before anyone could answer, the sound came again, this time louder, more insistent. It was followed by a low, rumbling growl, like the sound of something massive moving just outside. We froze, every muscle in my body tensing as I strained to listen. The growling continued, deep and guttural, reverberating through the walls. It was close, too close. "We need to move," I whispered, barely able to keep the terror out of my voice. "We can't stay here." "But where are we supposed to go?" Holly whispered back, her face pale with fear. Another crash, this time accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. Whatever was out there was getting closer, breaking its way through the house. "We have to hide," I said, my heart racing. "Now." Chris nodded, his eyes wide with panic. "There's a cellar door in the kitchen. I saw it earlier." Without wasting another second, we rushed toward the kitchen, the sound of the creature outside growing louder with every step. I could hear its heavy, uneven breathing now, a sickening sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was right outside. Chris yanked open the cellar door, revealing a set of narrow, rickety stairs leading down into the darkness below. "Hurry," Ethan urged, his voice trembling. We didn't need to be told twice. One by one, we descended into the cellar, the sound of the creature outside growing louder with each passing second. The cellar was damp and smelled of mildew, the air thick and heavy. The stairs creaked underfoot, and I winced with every step, praying the noise wouldn't draw the thing outside any closer. The moment we were all inside, Chris pulled the cellar door shut behind us, plunging the space into darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of our remaining candle, flickering weakly in Holly's hand. The growling stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. Then there was a slow, deliberate creak, like the sound of the front door being opened. The thing was inside the house now. I held my breath, my body pressed against the cold stone wall of the cellar. Above us, I could hear the heavy thud of footsteps, moving slowly, deliberately. It was searching for us. The sound of those heavy footsteps filled the cellar with an oppressive weight. Each thud reverberated through the wooden floor above, vibrating through my bones. Whatever it was, it moved slowly but purposefully, like it knew exactly what it was looking for, and that terrified me even more. We were crouched in the corner of the cellar, pressed against the damp stone walls. Holly's breathing was shallow and ragged, and Chris had his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white in the dim candlelight. The flame flickered, threatening to go out at any moment, and I prayed that it wouldn't. Somehow, the faint light was the only thing keeping us grounded, keeping the terror from consuming us completely. The footsteps stopped. I tensed, straining to hear anything in the deafening silence that followed. For a moment, there was nothing. No growling, no whispering, just silence. Then came a scraping sound, like nails or claws dragging across the wooden floor above us. Slow, deliberate. Ethan, beside me, stiffened and shot a glance my way. His eyes were wide, pupils blown with fear, and he mouthed the word, "What?" But I had no answer. The scraping grew louder, moving in long arcs across the floor. Whatever was up there was testing the boundaries, probing the house like a predator toying with its prey. I could feel Holly shaking beside me. Her hand reached for mine, and I gripped it tight, trying to offer some kind of reassurance, even though I had none to give. Then, without warning, the sound shifted. The scraping stopped, and there was a low, guttural growl, a sound that sent ice-cold fear down my spine. The creature was directly above us, standing at the spot where the cellar door was concealed. I could hear its ragged breathing now, deep and rasping, like it was inhaling the very air we were trying not to disturb. It knows we're here. That thought pulsed through my mind like a heartbeat, faster and faster. I held my breath, terrified that even the sound of that would give us away. The floorboards above us creaked under the weight of the creature as it moved. I glanced at Ethan, Chris, and Holly, who were all as paralyzed with fear as I was. No one dared to speak or move. Suddenly there was a sharp, splintering crack, like the sound of wood being torn apart. The cellar door. My heart leaped into my throat. I watched in horror as the old wooden hatch above us buckled, the wood groaning under immense pressure. "We have to move." I mouthed the words to the others, pointing to the far side of the cellar. There was another door, one I'd noticed earlier. I had no idea where it led, maybe another exit, maybe just another part of the house. But we didn't have a choice. If we stayed here, we were dead. Chris nodded, his face pale but determined. He motioned for us to move quietly, and one by one we began inching our way toward the far door, every creak of the cellar floor sending jolts of terror through me. Above us, the cracking intensified, and with one final violent crash, the cellar door was ripped open. We froze. In the dim light of Holly's candle, I saw it. A long, twisted arm, covered in dark leathery skin, reached down into the cellar. The the fingers grotesquely elongated and tipped with claws. The arm felt too long, unnatural, like it shouldn't belong to anything human. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the clawed hand grip the edge of the cellar hatch and scrape the wood, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. The creature lowered itself slowly, its grotesque body twisting unnaturally to fit through the narrow opening. I could see more of it now, a hunched form, its skin glistening in the faint light, and its eyes, dark, soulless pits, scanning the cellar. It didn't have a face, not really. Just those eyes and a maw filled with sharp, jagged teeth that dripped with something dark and viscous. Holly gasped, unable to hold it in any longer. The creature's head snapped in our direction. "Run!" I shouted, breaking the silence, and we bolted toward the door at the far end of the cellar. Chris yanked it open, and we spilled out into a narrow passageway. The air was colder here, damp and foul-smelling, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was putting as much distance between us and that thing as possible. Behind us, I heard the creature let out a hideous, ear-piercing shriek, and the sound of heavy, lumbering footsteps followed us. It was coming. Fast. We stumbled through the passage, the flickering light from the candle barely illuminating the way. I had no idea where we were going, but the passage seemed to wind downward, deeper into the earth. The walls were rough stone, slick with moisture, and the air grew colder with every step. "Where does this lead?" Holly panted, her voice frantic. "I don't know," Chris said, his voice tight with panic. "But we can't stop." The passage twisted and turned, the ceiling growing lower as we descended deeper into the earth. I could still hear the creature behind us, its shrieks echoing off the stone walls. It was relentless, like it wouldn't stop until it had us. Just when I thought the passage would go on forever, we burst into a wider chamber. It was dark, but the candlelight revealed the rough shape of the room, an underground cavern of some sort. There were ancient-looking stone carvings along the walls, faded and weathered with time. In the center of the chamber was an old stone altar, cracked and covered in strange symbols. "What the hell is this place?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I don't know," I said, my eyes scanning the room, "but we need to hide. Now." We hurried toward the back of the chamber, finding a narrow alcove tucked into the stone wall. The space was barely big enough for the four of us, but it offered some cover. We huddled together, our backs pressed against the cold stone, and waited. The shrieks grew louder again, echoing through the passageway. The creature was close, so close I could hear its ragged breathing. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could barely breathe. The darkness seemed to close in around us, suffocating, as the sound of the creature's footsteps entered the chamber. It was in the room with us. I bit down hard on my lip, trying to stay as still as possible. The others were deathly silent, barely daring to breathe. The creature let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through the air. I could hear its claws scraping along the stone floor, moving in slow, deliberate circles around the chamber. It was searching, hunting. For what felt like an eternity, the creature prowled the room, its guttural growls sending waves of terror through me. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it wouldn't find us. The candle had been extinguished in our haste to hide, leaving us in total darkness. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the growling stopped. The footsteps faded, retreating back down the passageway. We waited in silence, not daring to move until we were sure it was gone. Finally, Chris exhaled shakily. "I think it's gone," he whispered. "Are you sure?" Holly asked, her voice barely a breath. "No," Chris admitted, "but we can't stay here forever." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the altar in the center of the room. "What is this place, though? This doesn't feel like part of the village." I stared at the ancient carvings, my mind racing. The village wasn't just abandoned. It was hiding something far older and more dangerous than we had imagined. This underground chamber felt wrong, ancient and evil, like it had been here long before the village ever existed. "We're not the first ones to come here," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. "This place, it's been here for centuries." Holly's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I hesitated, "that whatever's happening here, it didn't start with us." The silence of the chamber pressed against my ears, broken only by the ragged breathing of the four of us. We were still huddled in the alcove, the weight of what we had just experienced hanging over us like a suffocating shroud. I glanced at the altar, its ancient carvings barely visible in the dim light, and felt a deep unease. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just a part of the village. It was something older, something that felt like it had been here for far longer than any of us could comprehend. And that creature, whatever it was tied to this place. "We have to get out of here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There has to be another way out." Chris nodded, standing shakily. "Let's move. We can't stay here." Ethan and Holly followed suit, their faces pale and drawn with exhaustion and fear. We were all running on fumes, adrenaline the only thing keeping us going. We moved toward the far end of the chamber, where a narrow passageway led deeper into the underground labyrinth. The stone walls closed in around us as we descended further, the air growing colder and more oppressive with every step. I could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on us, the darkness feeling more alive, like it was watching us. The passage twisted and turned, leading us into a series of small, interconnected rooms. Each one was filled with more strange carvings and symbols, etched into the stone like warnings. The deeper we went, the more the walls seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't explain. It was like the village was alive, its heart beating deep beneath the earth. "Do you think that thing's still following us?" Holly asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, but I could feel it in my gut. The creature wasn't done with us. It was lurking somewhere in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As we moved into the next chamber, I noticed something strange, an old, decayed wooden door at the far end. Unlike the other chambers, this one had signs of human presence, rotted furniture, tattered cloth, and remnants of what looked like old tools scattered across the floor. It was as if someone had once lived down here, hidden away from the rest of the village. "This doesn't make sense," Ethan muttered, running his fingers over the doorframe. "Why would someone live down here?" "They weren't living," I said, my mind racing. "They were hiding." Holly frowned. "Hiding from what?" I didn't answer, but I had a feeling we already knew. The creature, the village. This place was a prison, a trap. Whoever had been here before us had tried to escape, and they had failed. And now, we were caught in the same nightmare. I pushed the door open cautiously. Beyond it was a staircase, narrow and steep, leading upward. A faint light trickled down from somewhere above. "This might be it," I said, hope flickering in my chest. This could be a way out. Without another word, we began to ascend the stairs, the light growing brighter as we climbed. The air felt different here, lighter, fresher, like we were finally emerging from the depths of whatever horror had been lying in wait for us. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that we might actually make it out of here. But that hope was short-lived. Just as we reached the top of the staircase, a loud, bone-rattling roar echoed from behind us, reverberating through the stone walls. The creature was coming, faster this time, more desperate. "Go!" I shouted, pushing the others forward as we sprinted toward the exit. We burst through a crumbling stone archway and found ourselves standing in the open air again. The sky above us was a dull, overcast gray, but it was daylight, and the oppressive weight of the underground chamber lifted. We were outside, but we weren't free. We were still in the village. The narrow path in front of us twisted through more dilapidated buildings, leading toward the edge of the woods. I could see the faint outline of the forest in the distance, a wall of twisted, gnarled trees waiting for us. It was the only way out, and we didn't have time to think. The creature's roar grew louder, and I knew it was close. "Run!" I screamed, and we bolted down the path, our footsteps pounding against the uneven ground. The village seemed to twist and warp around us as we ran, the buildings shifting in and out of focus like a nightmare we couldn't escape. The air grew thick, the whispers returning louder now, like voices calling out from the shadows, urging us to turn back. But we kept running. As we neared the edge of the village, the path grew narrower, the trees looming closer. I could hear the creature behind us, its footsteps heavy and relentless, but I didn't dare look back. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I forced myself to keep going. Just as we reached the edge of the forest, Holly stumbled, her foot catching on a loose stone. She cried out, falling hard to the ground. "Holly!" Ethan shouted, turning to help her up. I skidded to a stop, rushing back to help. But before I could reach her, the creature's shriek cut through the air, and it was on us. I saw it, in all its horrific glory, a towering, grotesque form, its body twisted and deformed, its eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. It was no longer just a shadow. It was real, and it was fast. "Run!" I screamed at Ethan, but he wouldn't leave Holly behind. The creature lunged, its claws swiping through the air. In a desperate attempt to protect Holly, Ethan threw himself in front of her, the creature's claws slashing across his chest. He let out a choked cry of pain, blood spraying across the ground. "No," I shouted, but it was too late. Ethan collapsed to the ground, his body limp and unmoving. Holly screamed, her voice raw with anguish, but there was no time. The creature snarled, its attention now focused on me. I grabbed Holly's arm and yanked her to her feet, pulling her toward the forest. "We have to go," I shouted, my heart breaking for Ethan, but there was nothing we could do for him now. We stumbled into the forest, the trees closing in around us like a cage. The creature roared again, its massive form crashing through the village behind us. But the trees seemed to slow it down. Their twisted branches reached out like they were trying to hold it back. We ran deeper into the woods, the creature's growls growing fainter behind us. My legs were numb, my body running on pure adrenaline. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the forest began to thin. The trees gave way to an open field, and beyond that, I could see the faint outline of the road, the same road we had taken to get here. We had made it. We were out. I collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath, my entire body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Holly fell beside me, sobbing uncontrollably. For a long moment, we just lay there, too exhausted to move, too stunned to comprehend what had just happened. The village was behind us, silent and still. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. The village wasn't just a place, it was alive, and it would continue to haunt anyone who stumbled upon it. Ethan was gone, lost to the horrors that lurked in that cursed place. But Holly and I had survived. Barely. As we lay there staring up at the gray sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had escaped. But we hadn't truly escaped. The village would stay with us, a shadow in the back of our minds, a whisper in the dark. And one day, I knew it would call us back. But for now, we were free. At least that's what I told myself. Story 2. It was a night like any other. Or at least that's what I thought as I clocked in for my usual shift. Driving taxis at night isn't for everyone. Some find the darkness unnerving, the silence too oppressive. But for me, it's always been a comfort. There's something about the quiet streets, the way the city seems to exhale after a day of chaos, that made me feel at ease. I liked the solitude, the way my car and I moved like shadows through the sleeping city. That night was no different. The weather was cool, with a slight mist hanging in the air. I could see the occasional flicker of streetlights reflecting off the damp pavement. A slow night for sure, but that was nothing new. Most of the fares I picked up were either headed home from a late night at work or stumbling out of bars, too drunk to remember their own addresses. In a way, they were all just passengers passing through, like ghosts themselves, fading into the background as soon as they stepped out of the car. I was halfway through my shift when the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Car 18, you got a pickup near the west side of town, Holloway Street. Someone needs a ride." I frowned. Holloway was one of those forgotten parts of the city, a place that barely existed on the map. The kind of street where the houses were old, sagging with age, and the streetlights flickered more often than they stayed on. I rarely got calls from there, and when I did, they usually weren't good ones. But a fare's a fare, and I wasn't about to turn down the chance to make a few extra bucks. "Copy that, I'm on my way," I replied, flicking off the radio and turning the car toward the west side. The mist thickened as I drove, the headlights barely cutting through the gloom. The city felt even more deserted than usual, the streets eerily quiet. I tried to shake off the unease that settled in the pit of my stomach, telling myself it was just another night, just another fare. But as I approached Holloway Street, that uneasy feeling grew stronger. Holloway was just as I remembered, silent, forgotten, like it had been abandoned by time. The houses lining the street were dark and crumbling, their windows black as if they'd been long abandoned. The street was empty, not a single person in sight. I pulled up to the address the dispatcher had given me and waited. There was no one outside, no sign of anyone looking for a ride. I checked my phone. No missed calls or messages. Maybe they'd changed their mind. Maybe it was just a prank. I was about to leave when I saw movement in my rearview mirror. A figure was walking toward the car, emerging from the shadows like they'd materialized out of thin air. It was a woman, her figure draped in a long, dark coat, her face obscured by the hood she wore. She moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if every step was carefully measured. I rolled down the window, leaning out slightly. "You call for a cab?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet night. The woman nodded once, without saying a word. There was something unsettling about the way she moved, the way she didn't speak, but I pushed the thought aside. Maybe she was just shy or cold. It didn't matter. I unlocked the doors and she slid into the back seat, her movements silent and smooth. "Where to?" I asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She didn't respond right away. For a moment I wasn't sure if she'd heard me, but then she finally spoke, her voice soft and almost ethereal, like it wasn't really coming from her at all. "Take me to the old bridge." I hesitated. The old bridge? No one went to the old bridge, not anymore. It had been closed off for years, ever since the accident. But again, affair's affair. If that's where she wanted to go, who was I to argue? "All right," I said, putting the car in gear. "The old bridge it is." As I drove, the silence in the car felt oppressive. The woman didn't speak again, and I didn't feel like breaking the silence. I stole glances at her through the mirror, but her face remained hidden in the shadows of her hood. There was something about her that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, but I couldn't figure out what. She was just sitting there, quiet and still, like any other passenger. Yet, something felt wrong. The streets grew darker as we left the main part of the city behind, the buildings thinning out as we headed toward the outskirts. The mist was thicker here, swirling in front of the headlights like ghostly fingers reaching for the car. I tried to focus on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The woman's presence in the back seat felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on me. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if the air in the car had grown colder since she'd gotten in. Finally, we reached the turnoff for the old bridge. The road was rough and overgrown with weeds, the bridge itself barely visible in the distance. I hadn't been here in years, not since the accident that had shut it down. I didn't know why anyone would want to come out here, especially in the middle of the night. I pulled the car to a stop at the edge of the bridge and glanced back at the woman. She still hadn't moved or spoken. "We're here," I said, my voice sounding uncertain. "Are you sure this is where you want to be?" The woman slowly turned her head to look at me, and for the first time I could see her face, or at least I thought I could. But the shadows in the car seemed to cling to her, obscuring her features, making it hard to see clearly. "Yes," she whispered. "This is where it happened." A chill ran down my spine at her words, and I couldn't stop the question from tumbling out of my mouth. "What happened?" She didn't answer right away, but when she finally spoke, her voice was so soft I had to strain to hear it. "I was waiting for him," she said. "He promised he'd meet me here, but he never came." There was something about the way she said it, the way her voice trembled with a sadness so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I just sat there, staring at the bridge, waiting for her to do something, anything. And then, she was gone. I blinked, my heart racing as I turned to look at the back seat. It was empty. The woman, the passenger, had disappeared, vanished into thin air. One moment she was there, and the next she was gone, like she had never existed. I stared at the empty seat, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. I had seen her, spoken to her, she was real. But now, there was nothing. Just an empty car, the mist swirling outside the windows, and the old bridge looming in the distance. For what felt like an eternity, I sat frozen in the front seat, my hands still gripping the wheel. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my mind raced to make sense of what I had just seen, or rather, what I hadn't seen. The woman had been in the car. She had spoken to me, asked me to take her to this forsaken bridge. But now, she was gone. I couldn't even hear the sound of a door closing, the usual thump when someone steps out of the car. Nothing. Just silence. The air around me felt colder, like it had dropped several degrees in an instant. I glanced at the back seat again, half expecting her to suddenly reappear, but there was only emptiness. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. The digital clock on the dashboard read 3:13 a.m. That hour, those eerie early morning hours, suddenly felt more significant. The so-called witching hour when the veil between the living and the dead was said to be thinnest. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. At least, I didn't until now. I clicked on my phone's flashlight and slowly opened the door, stepping out into the thick mist. The night felt heavier than before, like the weight of the fog wasn't just from the moisture, but something far darker. The bridge loomed ahead of me, an ancient structure barely visible in the gloom. It had been years since anyone had driven across it. I didn't even think it was safe anymore. But there it stood, stretching out into the unknown, like a path that should remain untaken. I don't know what compelled me to move forward, but I found myself walking toward the bridge. My feet crunched against the gravel and weeds as I approached. The air smelled damp and earthy, like the scent of decay that hangs around places left forgotten for too long. Suddenly, a faint sound reached my ears, something like soft weeping, carried on the wind. My heart leaped into my throat. It was unmistakable. The woman's voice. She was out there, somewhere on the bridge. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is anyone there?" No answer. The mist shifted, and for just a moment, I thought I saw her, standing at the far end of the bridge, her figure barely visible through the fog. She was looking out over the water, her head bowed as if in deep sorrow. My breath caught in my throat. I should have turned and run, but something held me there. Some invisible force seemed to pull me toward her, like I was trapped in a dream I couldn't wake from. I took a step forward, then another, until I was standing at the entrance to the bridge. The wooden planks creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it, the sound echoing in the silence. The woman didn't move. She remained still, her back to me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak again. "Miss? Are you okay?" Her weeping stopped, and for a moment there was only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the faint ripple of the water below. Then slowly, she turned to face me. My breath hitched in my throat as I saw her face. It was the same woman who had been in my car, her hood still covering most of her head. But now, there was something horribly wrong. Her eyes, they were hollow. Not just empty, but like black pits, as if whatever life had once filled them was long gone. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her lips moved as if trying to form words, but no sound came out. She raised a hand and pointed to the water below the bridge, her finger trembling as she did so. I followed her gaze, leaning slightly over the railing to peer into the darkness below. At first, I couldn't see anything through the thick mist, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw something floating in the water, something pale and still. A body. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The figure in the water was unmistakable. It was her. The same woman who now stood in front of me. Her lifeless body drifted in the current, her dark coat spreading out around her like a shroud. My mind reeled. How could this be possible? How could she be here, standing on the bridge, and there, dead in the water, all at once? The woman stepped toward me, her hollow eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if I was standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than I could comprehend. "You have to help him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He never made it." Before I could ask what she meant, the woman began to fade, her form dissolving into the mist like smoke. In seconds, she was gone, leaving me alone on the bridge with the cold wind and the dark water below. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. What the hell had just happened? Was I going crazy? Had I really just seen what I thought I'd seen? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for sure. Something was terribly wrong at that bridge, and whoever that woman had been, she was tied to it. Her ghost wasn't just a figment of my imagination. She wanted something from me. But what? Back in my car, I slammed the door and locked it, as if that flimsy barrier could protect me from whatever haunted the night. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the bridge in the rearview mirror. The mist was thick, swirling like a living thing, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. But the woman, no, the ghost, was gone. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave, had to get far away from this place and try to forget what I'd seen. But as I reached for the ignition, I realized something. The woman's words. You have to help him. He never made it. Help who? Was she talking about someone else? Another passenger? Another lost soul trapped by this cursed place? And what did she mean? He never made it? Did she mean to the bridge? Or somewhere else? I started the car, the engine rumbling to life, but I didn't pull away. I was torn between the overwhelming urge to leave and the gnawing feeling that I couldn't just walk away. Something was keeping me here, some deep sense that this wasn't over. I grabbed my phone and opened the search engine, typing in Holloway Street accident Old Bridge. The results were sparse, mostly old news articles, long forgotten by anyone who hadn't been directly involved. But one caught my eye. It was a short article, dated nearly 30 years ago. A young couple had been driving home late one night when they veered off the road near the old bridge and crashed into the river below. The car had sunk quickly, and while rescue crews had managed to recover the vehicle, only one body had been found. The woman. The man, her fiancé, had never been found. The image attached to the article showed the bridge looking eerily similar to how it appeared now, though the trees and foliage had grown thicker since then. And the woman in the picture, the one who had died in the accident, was unmistakable. It was her, the ghostly passenger who had been in my car. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. This was impossible. She had been dead for nearly 30 years. But there she was, standing by the bridge, asking for help. Help him. He never made it. My heart pounded as the pieces began to fall into place. The man, her fiancé, was still missing. She wasn't looking for her own release. She was searching for him. For nearly 30 years, her spirit had been trapped here, tied to this bridge, waiting for someone to help her find him. I didn't know what to do. Could I really help her? Could I find someone who had been lost for so long? But deep down, I knew I had to try. If I didn't, I'd never be able to forget this night. I'd never be able to shake the feeling that I had left something unfinished. Taking a deep breath, I put the car in gear and turned around, heading back toward the bridge. If there was any chance of finding the missing man, it had to start here. As I drove back toward the old bridge, my thoughts raced. I felt like a detective in a twisted mystery novel, tasked with solving a crime long buried beneath years of neglect and sorrow. The woman's ghost had pointed me in the direction of her lost fiancé, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to follow through. The mist swirled thicker as I parked the car near the bridge once more, the air growing colder with every passing second. I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I approached the entrance to the bridge. The old wood creaked under my weight, a sound that echoed eerily in the silence. I remembered the article mentioned something about the car being recovered, but the man being unaccounted for. If he had drowned, would there be any remains left to find after so many years? Or perhaps he had escaped the wreck and wandered off, only to meet a different fate altogether. Either way, it felt like there was something I had to uncover. Okay, I whispered to myself, trying to steady my nerves. I can do this. I walked to the middle of the bridge, peering over the edge into the dark water below. The moonlight glinted off the surface, creating rippling reflections that danced like lost souls. I had no idea how deep the water was, but I felt a strange compulsion to look for something, anything that might connect me to the woman's fiancé. Is anyone down there? I called out, half expecting the sound of my own voice to vanish into the void. Is there someone I can help? The only response was the soft lapping of water against the bridge's supports, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air seemed charged with anticipation, as if the very night was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, I heard it again, a faint sound, like a soft echo of weeping, but this time it felt closer. I turned to see if the ghostly woman had returned, but all I saw was the thickening fog. Just as I was about to call out again, a shadow moved in the mist at the edge of the bridge. I squinted, straining to see through the dense fog. Hello? Is someone there? The figure materialized and my breath caught in my throat. It was a man, standing at the far end of the bridge, silhouetted against the mist. He was looking out over the water just like the woman had. My heart raced with hope and fear. Could this be him? The missing fiancé? Who are you? I called, my voice trembling. Are you okay? He turned slowly, and as he did, I felt an icy chill run down my spine. His face was gaunt, hollow, and his eyes were just like hers, dark, empty voids. He didn't say anything, just continued to stare at me, a sorrowful expression etched across his features. What happened to you? I stepped closer, the impulse to help surging through me. Are you lost? Did you come here for her? His gaze remained fixed on me, and I could feel a strange energy in the air, an unspoken connection that pulled me forward. Then finally he spoke. She's been waiting for me. His voice was low and cracked, filled with decades of pain and longing. I felt a knot tighten in my chest, the weight of his sorrow pressing down on me. Who are you? I asked, my heart racing. I'm David, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have come back for her. I should have. David, you need to let her go, I urged, taking another step closer. She's looking for you. She doesn't want to be trapped here anymore. He looked down at the water, the pain in his eyes deepening. I can't. I didn't mean to leave her. I thought I could make it to the shore. But I couldn't swim. I couldn't save her. I tried, but I was too late. As the moon broke through the clouds, illuminating the bridge, I noticed the water below shimmering like 1,000 shattered dreams. I could feel the depth of his grief, the regret that had held him captive all these years. David, you can find peace, I said, my voice trembling with urgency. If you let her go, she can move on, and so can you. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in his dark eyes. I can't just leave her. Not if you're still holding on to the past, I replied. You both deserve to be free. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the bridge, the mist swirling around us as if responding to our conversation. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the woman standing behind me, urging him to listen. Please, you have to help her, he pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I never wanted to leave her. I will, I promised, my heart aching for both of them. But you have to let her go. She needs to know you're okay, that you're not trapped anymore. He took a step closer to me, and I could feel the cold emanating from him, an aura of lost time and grief. Will she forgive me? I think she already has, I assured him. But you need to show her that you're ready to move on. A flicker of understanding passed across his face, and he looked out over the water again. I've been so afraid she wouldn't want to see me. She's waiting for you, I urged. You just need to let her know you're free. He nodded slowly, and for a moment, I felt the weight of his sorrow lift. It was as if the air had changed, the tension of years of grief beginning to dissolve. Thank you, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. I didn't know if anyone would come. And then, with a sudden gust of wind, the mist thickened again, swirling around us like a cyclone of shadows. I took a step back, instinctively shielding my eyes, and when I looked again, David was gone. The weight of his presence remained, however, like a shadow lingering in the air. I stood at the edge of the bridge, staring into the dark water, feeling the coolness of the night wash over me. And then I heard her voice, soft and ethereal, carried by the wind. Thank you. I turned, and there she was, the ghostly woman, her face illuminated by the moonlight. The emptiness in her eyes was gone, replaced with a warmth that filled the air around her. You helped him find peace, she said, her voice like a gentle breeze. Now I can finally let go. Tears filled my eyes as I realized what this moment meant. You're free now? I whispered, overwhelmed by emotion. You can move on. She smiled, a bittersweet expression that reflected both joy and sorrow. Thank you for giving me that chance. I'll always be grateful. And then, as quickly as she had appeared, she began to fade, the mist enveloping her like a shroud. I felt an overwhelming sense of loss, but also relief. The weight of years of grief had been lifted, and she was finally free. I stood at the edge of the bridge, staring into the darkness, feeling as if a piece of the night had shifted. The air was still, the silence profound. I had come to this bridge expecting nothing more than a strange encounter with a ghostly passenger, but what I found was something far more profound. The ghosts of the past had found their peace, and I felt a strange sense of fulfillment in helping them. But as I turned to leave, I felt a glimmer of something within me, a whisper of the eternal, a reminder that we are all just passengers, navigating through the night. I drove away from the bridge, the mist slowly receding as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. The sky transformed from deep indigo to soft shades of lavender and pink, heralding the arrival of a new day. I felt lighter, as if the burdens I had carried for years were finally being lifted. The events of the night replayed in my mind like a surreal dream. I had met two lost souls, bound by tragedy and regret, and somehow I had been part of their release. My heart swelled with a mixture of sadness and joy as I thought of the woman's gentle smile and David's bittersweet acceptance. As I drove through the waking city, the familiar streets felt different, almost alive. The early morning sunlight illuminated the buildings, and the air was filled with the sounds of a world stirring to life. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the ordinary moments we often take for granted. The laughter of children on their way to school, the aroma of fresh coffee wafting from the corner cafe, the soft rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. When I returned to the taxi garage, I parked my car and sat for a moment, absorbing everything that had happened. I thought about how the city never sleeps, always bustling with lives intertwined in countless ways, often unseen. The lost, the forgotten, and the hopeful were all part of this tapestry. The dispatcher walked past, giving me a curious look. "You're back early," he said, glancing at the clock. "Long night?" I nodded, a small smile creeping onto my face. "You could say that." "Got any good stories?" he asked, leaning against the wall. I shook my head. Just the usual. But in my heart, I knew it was anything but usual. I took my phone out and opened the Notes app, thinking of David and the woman whose names I still didn't know. I started typing, documenting the surreal experience. I wrote about the bridge, the fog, the ghostly figures, and the tragic love story that had bound them together for decades. I wanted to capture the essence of what I had witnessed, the importance of love, loss, and the hope of redemption. As I wrote, the sun continued to rise, bathing the city in golden light. The warmth seeped through the windows, filling the room with a sense of peace. I paused for a moment, looking out at the street below. It was just an ordinary morning, but I felt a deeper connection to everything around me. Time passed, and as I finished typing, I looked down at the screen, my heart racing. The words had flowed from me like water, but it was more than just a story. It was a tribute to those who had passed through my life, even if only briefly. I saved the document, deciding that someday I would share it. Perhaps it would help someone else understand that our lives are intertwined in ways we cannot always see. Perhaps it would bring hope to someone lost, just like David and the woman had been. A few hours later, my shift began, and I hit the streets again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Each passenger I picked up felt like a story waiting to unfold, a connection waiting to be made. I greeted them warmly, eager to hear their tales, their struggles, and their joys. The day turned into evening, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself passing the old bridge again. The mist had lifted, and the bridge stood proudly against the evening sky, a monument to the stories it held. As I drove past, I glanced toward the water, half expecting to see the ghostly woman or David standing on the bridge. But they were gone, and I felt a sense of finality wash over me. They were free now, and so was I. With a soft smile, I continued down the road, knowing that even the most fleeting encounters could leave a lasting impact. Life was full of mysteries, and every passenger held a story worth sharing. As I navigated through the streets, I felt a deep sense of peace settle within me, a reminder that every journey is important and every soul matters. We are all just passengers in this vast, beautiful world, navigating the winding roads of our existence, connected by the love and memories we carry. Months passed, and I often found myself reflecting on that night at the bridge. The experience had changed me. It was a reminder that we are never truly alone, even in our darkest moments. There are spirits and stories around us waiting to be heard. One day, while cleaning out my old things, I stumbled upon a box filled with mementos from my life. The photos, letters, and trinkets that had gathered dust over the years. As I sifted through them, a familiar face caught my eye. It was an old picture of a couple, standing together on the shore of a lake, smiling brightly. I recognized them immediately. David and the woman from the bridge. I stared at the photo, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. They had shared a life, filled with laughter and love before the tragedy struck. It was a reminder that love transcends even death, that our connections with one another are eternal. With renewed determination, I began to write their story, using my notes as a foundation. I poured my heart into it, weaving their lives together into a narrative that captured their love, their loss, and ultimately their redemption. I envisioned sharing their story, perhaps even turning it into a book. I knew that if I could reach even one person who felt lost, it would be worth it. After all, every ghostly passenger deserves to have their story told. And so I continued my journey, one passenger at a time, carrying their stories with me, always remembering that the past may haunt us, but it can also guide us toward the light. Story 3. I stood before the old family house, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The faded paint peeled like the bark of an ancient tree, and the windows were clouded with years of dust. It was mine now, left to me by a grandmother I had never known. Her name whispered in hushed tones among family members who spoke of her with a blend of reverence and fear. The town was small and remote, surrounded by thick forests and steep hills, the kind of place that felt as if time had forgotten it. As I approached the house, an unsettling sensation washed over me, a sense that the structure itself was watching, breathing, alive in ways I couldn't understand. The first night in the house was difficult. The air inside was stale, heavy with a past that pressed against my chest. I lay on the creaky bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unsettling sounds that crept through the walls. It felt as if the house were sighing, a deep, rumbling breath that echoed in the stillness. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something lurked just beyond my perception. The next morning, I awoke to the sun streaming through the dusty windows, illuminating the cobwebs in the corners like gossamer ghosts. After a quick breakfast, I began unpacking boxes, determined to breathe life back into the house. As I moved furniture and cleared away decades of dust, I stumbled upon a small, leather-bound journal, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the attic. Curiosity piqued. I opened the journal to find faded handwriting, scrawled in a delicate script. It belonged to my great-grandmother, and the entries were filled with strange accounts of rituals and beliefs that revolved around the house. The first few pages detailed her deep connection to the structure, describing it as a living entity that breathed with its inhabitants. "The house responds to emotions," she wrote. "It craves love and despair, joy and sorrow. It feeds on the essence of those who dwell within." The words sent a chill down my spine. I skimmed through more entries, finding mentions of an ancient energy that thrived in the walls, drawing strength from the family that had lived there for generations. There were warnings, too, of madness that had claimed some, and the whispers that would drive others to the brink of despair. As evening fell, I felt an inexplicable pull toward the attic. The breathing grew louder, a soft, rhythmic sound that resonated in my bones. I climbed the creaking stairs, compelled to understand what lay hidden in the shadows. The attic was cluttered with old furniture and forgotten treasures. A dusty mirror stood against the wall, its surface clouded but still reflective. As I approached it, I caught my breath. My reflection appeared distorted, almost as if the mirror itself were breathing. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, but the attic was empty. The house sighed again, a deep and mournful sound that echoed around me. I felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity, as if the house were inviting me to uncover its secrets. That night, the dreams began. They were vivid and unsettling, filled with images of my ancestors, their faces twisted in anguish and fear. I saw shadows flitting through the halls, whispers echoing in my ears, fragments of conversations long past. It felt as though the house was sharing its history with me, but all I felt was the weight of their sorrow. Days turned into weeks, and the house continued to influence me. I spent hours exploring every corner, the whispers growing clearer with each passing day. It was as if the house was teaching me, guiding me through the memories trapped within its walls. I started to lose track of time. I would sit in the attic for hours, listening to the breathing, the whispers growing louder until they filled my mind. My meals became sporadic, and my dreams grew darker. The house demanded my attention, and I could no longer resist its call. One stormy night, I was jolted awake by a cacophony of voices, urgent and pleading. I stumbled out of bed, drawn toward the attic, the walls vibrating with energy. I felt the air thickening around me as I reached the top of the stairs. The attic was alive, the shadows swirling like a tempest. I could hear my name being called, mixed with sobs and laughter. "Mia, help us!" The voices sounded familiar and foreign all at once, as if they were a part of me but also separate. As I approached the mirror, I saw my reflection distort again, but this time it was different. The face staring back was not just mine. It was a collage of my ancestors, their features melding into one another, eyes wide with fear. The house sighed heavily, and in that moment, I understood the truth. It was a collector of souls, a vortex of emotions that had trapped generations within its walls. Panicking, I stepped back, but the mirror began to glow, pulsating with the rhythm of the house's breath. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt myself being pulled toward it, as if the house wanted me to join the others. "No!" I shouted, my voice lost in the chaos. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping me in the attic. The shadows closed in around me, and I felt the cold breath of the house on my neck, urging me to give in. In that moment of terror, I remembered the journal. I needed to reclaim my power, to break the house's hold over me. I scrambled through the attic, searching for the journal, my heart racing. The house seemed to shift and sigh in response, as if testing my resolve. Finally, I found it, clutching it tightly in my hands. I began to read aloud from the pages, invoking the names of my ancestors, reminding the house of their strength and love. "You do not own me," I cried. "I am not yours to take." The whispers began to quiet, the shadows retreating as I spoke. The air thickened, but my determination grew stronger. I could feel the energy of the house shifting, the connection breaking as I claimed my identity. With one final desperate scream, I shouted, "I will not be a part of you." The mirror shattered, fragments flying like shards of light, and the house let out a deafening wail, the breath of anguish escaping into the night. The door burst open, and I stumbled backward, gasping for air. The house trembled around me, the walls cracking as the breath became a roar. I turned and fled, racing down the stairs, the shadows swirling in a frantic dance. I burst through the front door and fell onto the overgrown lawn, gasping for breath as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. The house behind me shuddered, the ground trembling beneath my feet. I watched in horror as the structure began to collapse, the weight of its secrets finally too much to bear. As the sun rose, the house crumbled in on itself, the breath that had once filled its walls dissipating like mist in the morning light. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, mingled with sadness for those who had been lost within its depths. I sat on the grass, my heart racing as I stared at the ruins. The air felt lighter, the whispers fading into silence. I had broken free, but I would carry the memories of those who had been trapped with me. In the days that followed, I found solace in the knowledge that I had reclaimed my life. I returned to the town, sharing my story with those who would listen, honoring the memory of my ancestors. I learned to appreciate the beauty of the present, understanding that while the past shapes us, it does not define us. The house that breathed was no more, a reminder of the struggles faced by those who came before me. But I was free, and as I walked away, I felt a sense of hope blooming within me. A new beginning, untainted by the shadows of the past. Story 4. When I received the news of my inheritance, I felt a rush of mixed emotions. My distant relative, a woman I had never met, had left me her estate, a sprawling, crumbling mansion in a remote town that seemed forgotten by time. The moment I stepped onto the property, I felt an odd pull, as if the house itself were beckoning me closer. The mansion was imposing, its tall, weathered facade cloaked in ivy and shadows. I hesitated at the entrance, an unsettling sensation crawling up my spine. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence, punctuated only by the creaking of the wooden floors beneath my feet. My heart raced as I explored room after room, each more eerie than the last. Faded wallpaper hung in tatters, and antique furniture loomed like specters in the dim light. But it was in a neglected corner of the house that I first encountered the mirror. The moment I saw it, I felt a strange connection, an inexplicable bond. The mirror was large and ornate, its frame intricately carved with swirling designs that resembled tendrils reaching out into the air. As I gazed into its glassy surface, I felt a pulse, a soft, rhythmic whisper that seemed to call my name. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself spending more time in the mansion. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was alive in some way, its energy mingling with mine. The mirror drew me in like a moth to a flame, and I often caught myself staring into its depths, searching for something just out of reach. At first, the whispers were faint, mere echoes that faded in and out of my consciousness. But slowly they grew louder, more insistent, revealing glimpses of my past, memories I had long buried. Each time I looked into the mirror, I felt a piece of my soul being laid bare. My friends noticed my growing obsession. "Elena, are you okay?" they would ask, concern etched on their faces. "You've been so distant lately." I brushed off their worries, convincing myself that they simply didn't understand. The mirror understood me. It showed me things, beautiful things, through its haunting reflections. One night, I sat before the mirror, paintbrush in hand, creating art that flowed from my heart like a river. The canvas filled with images inspired by the whispers, but each stroke capturing emotions I had never dared to express. My paintings became darker, more complex, but they felt like an extension of myself, each one a piece of my soul laid bare for the world to see. Compelled to uncover the mansion's history, I began researching its origins. I spent hours in the local library, poring over old newspaper articles and town records. The stories I unearthed were dark and tragic, filled with whispers of loss and betrayal. I learned that the mansion had once belonged to a woman accused of witchcraft, an enigmatic figure who had mysteriously vanished, leaving behind a legacy shrouded in sorrow. The townsfolk spoke of her mirror, claiming it had the power to capture souls and reveal hidden truths. As I read the accounts, a chill ran down my spine. The more I learned, the more I felt a connection to the witch, as if her spirit intertwined with mine. I began to experience vivid nightmares, where the witch appeared before me, her voice a haunting melody that echoed in the recesses of my mind. "Find me," she would whisper, her eyes filled with a longing that resonated deep within my soul. I felt compelled to explore the house further, to uncover the secrets hidden within its walls. Each room I entered seemed to vibrate with energy, the air thick with a palpable presence. The mirror in the attic became my sanctuary, a place where I could confront my fears and seek answers. As time passed, I found myself increasingly isolated, drawn deeper into the mansion's embrace. Friends and family expressed concern, but I could feel the house calling to me, urging me to stay. The mirror became my confidant, my muse, and my obsession. My artwork flourished, but it also grew darker, reflecting the turmoil brewing inside me. I painted scenes filled with haunting landscapes and twisted figures, each canvas echoing the emotions that the mirror revealed. My friends began to worry, sensing the change in me. "Elena, you need to get out more," they urged. "This isn't healthy." But I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the mirror behind. One night, as I stood before the mirror, the whispers became louder, transforming into a cacophony of voices. "Help us! Find us!" they cried. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, my heart racing. I had been drawn too far into this world, and I could feel the witch's presence growing stronger. Determined to confront the witch and the mirror, I made my way to the attic, where the air was thick with anticipation. I stood before the mirror, staring into its depths, my reflection swirling and shifting as the whispers enveloped me. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled, and I was thrust into a vision, a flood of memories that were not my own. I saw the witch's life unfold before me, her moments of joy and heartbreak flashing like a movie reel. Betrayal had led to her downfall, and I felt her pain resonate within me. I was not merely a bystander, I was a part of her story. "Embrace me," the witch's voice echoed. "Together, we can transcend this world." I felt the pull, the temptation to give in to the darkness that beckoned, but as I watched her anguish unfold, I realized that I didn't want to repeat her mistakes. I had to break the cycle. That night, I made a choice. I embraced the witch's power, allowing it to flow through me, transforming my art into something extraordinary. The colors became vibrant, the emotions raw and real. I poured my heart into every stroke, creating pieces that mesmerized everyone who saw them. But with this newfound power came consequences. The whispers became a constant presence in my mind, demanding more from me. I could feel the witch's influence growing stronger, her desires intertwining with my own. I had become a vessel for her spirit, and as my fame grew, so did my isolation. As my exhibitions gained attention, I became increasingly erratic. Friends grew concerned, but I was swept away by the euphoria of success. The mirror's whispers turned into a haunting chorus, urging me to sacrifice for my art, for power. I could feel the darkness closing in, threatening to consume me whole. During one particularly chaotic exhibition, I unveiled a painting that felt like a culmination of my journey. It was dark, filled with swirling shadows and tortured figures. As I stepped back to admire my work, the mirror shattered, sending shards flying across the room. In that moment, the witch's spirit erupted, filling the space with a deafening wail. "You cannot escape me," she screamed, her rage palpable. The house trembled, the walls vibrating with energy as I felt myself being pulled into the mirror's remnants. "No," I shouted, fighting against the tide of darkness. I had to reclaim my identity, to break free from her grasp. The room spun around me, but I focused on the memories of my ancestors, the love that had been lost. "I am not you," I screamed, channeling my pain into a single thought: freedom. With one final surge of determination, I closed my eyes and envisioned a canvas, painting a powerful image of my own spirit rising above the darkness. I felt the witch's hold weaken, and as I opened my eyes, the energy shifted. As the mirror's energy dissipated, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The witch's voice faded into silence, her presence lifting like a fog. The room fell quiet, and the remnants of the shattered mirror glimmered in the light. I emerged from the chaos, gasping for breath, my heart pounding. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. I had broken the cycle, freed myself from the witch's grasp. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I shared my experiences with those around me, using my art to inspire others and tell the stories of the past. The mansion became a gallery for my work, a space filled with light and hope rather than darkness. Years later, as I stood in my gallery, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The mirror had been a vessel of darkness, but it had also shown me my true self. I had embraced my struggles, transformed them into something beautiful. As I gazed into a new mirror hanging on the wall, I smiled, realizing it was no longer a portal to darkness, but a reflection of resilience and hope. I had learned to honor the past while forging my own path. And as the whispers of the past faded into echoes, I felt a sense of peace. The mirror's whisper had become a gentle reminder of who I was, a survivor, an artist, and a beacon of light for others lost in the shadows. Story 5. I drove into the town of Eldermere just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the streets. It was a small, sleepy place nestled between rolling hills, far removed from the bustling city life I had grown accustomed to. The sign welcoming me read, "Eldermere, a place of peace." But something about the name felt ironic as I glanced around at the dilapidated buildings and flickering streetlights. The air was thick with an uneasy silence, the kind that wraps around you like a heavy blanket. I pulled into a small motel at the edge of town, the neon sign buzzing weakly. The vacancy light flickered above the door, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stepped inside. The receptionist was a woman named Agnes, her gray hair pulled back into a tight bun, her eyes sharp and piercing. She barely smiled as she handed me the key to my room, number 3. "You'll want to keep your doors locked at night," she warned, her voice low and gravelly. "Not that anything will happen, usually." "Usually?" I echoed, trying to brush off the unease that settled in my stomach. "Oh, it's just an old town's stories, nothing to worry about," she said, but I could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. I nodded, forcing a smile as I took the key and headed to my room. The room was small and unremarkable, with faded floral wallpaper and a bed that sagged in the middle. After unpacking, I decided to explore the town, hoping to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me. The streets were deserted, the only sounds my footsteps echoing against the cracked pavement. I wandered past shuttered storefronts and empty parks, A chill wind swept through the streets, rustling the leaves of the trees that lined the sidewalks. It felt as if the town was holding its breath, waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As night fell, I returned to the motel, feeling the weight of fatigue pull at my eyelids. I settled into bed, my mind racing with thoughts of the oddness I'd sensed. Just as I began to drift off, a sound jolted me awake. A soft tapping, like fingernails scratching against wood. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. The sound continued, persistent and unsettling. It seemed to come from the walls, and I glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. I pulled the covers tighter around me, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But as the minutes ticked by, the tapping grew louder, more frantic. I mustered the courage to get up, tiptoeing to the door and peering out into the dimly lit hallway. Everything seemed still, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I returned to bed, convinced that sleep would chase away the oddities of the night. Morning arrived with a strange sense of relief. I showered and made my way to a local diner, hoping for a hot cup of coffee and a warm meal. The diner was a quaint place, filled with mismatched chairs and old photographs on the walls. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Linda, greeted me with a smile. "You're new in town, aren't you?" she asked as she poured my coffee. I nodded, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the previous night. "Just passing through." Linda's smile faded slightly. "Well, you picked a strange time to visit. This town, it has its quirks." "Quirks?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "People don't sleep much around here. You'll notice it soon enough," she said, her tone growing serious. "And if you hear tapping at night, just ignore it." "Why?" I asked, bewildered. "Just trust me," she replied, a shadow crossing her face before she turned away to serve another table. I finished my meal, feeling a knot tightening in my stomach. What had I walked into? I spent the rest of the day exploring Eldermere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. As dusk fell again, I prepared myself for another sleepless night. That night, I was determined to stay awake. I propped myself up in bed, a book in hand, but my eyelids grew heavy as the minutes slipped away. Just as I started to drift off, the tapping began again. This time louder, more insistent. My heart raced as I threw off the covers and stood up. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the silence. The tapping ceased for a moment, and I held my breath, straining to hear anything beyond the sudden stillness. Then, as if in response, it resumed, now accompanied by a soft whisper. "Help us!" Chills raced down my spine as I stumbled back against the wall. "Who's there?" I called out, but the only answer was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed my phone, dialing the motel's front desk. "Agnes," I said breathlessly when she answered. "Something's wrong in my room. There's tapping and whispers." She paused, her voice low and grave. "Just try to ignore it, dear. It's the town's curse. You're not the first to hear it." "What do you mean, curse?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Those who cannot sleep often hear the voices of the restless. It's best to avoid listening." With that, she hung up, leaving me alone with my fear. I paced the room, unsure of what to do. My thoughts raced, and I could feel the walls closing in. I pulled the curtains shut and sat on the bed, determined to keep my mind busy. The tapping continued, a steady rhythm that seemed to pulse with the night. The next day, I sought answers. I returned to the diner, finding Linda busy serving customers. I approached her, my nerves frayed. "I need to know about this town. What's happening here?" She sighed, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It's hard to explain, but Eldermere is different. The town has a history of tragedy. A long time ago, a group of people vanished without a trace, and the townsfolk believed they could hear their whispers at night." "Vanished?" I asked, my heart racing. "What happened to them?" "No one knows. Some say they were taken by the night, while others believe they're trapped in a sort of limbo," she explained. "The tapping is a sign of their restlessness. If you hear it, it means they want to be freed, but listening too closely can draw them in." "What can I do?" I pressed, feeling a surge of determination. "Stay awake if you can. And whatever you do, don't let them in," she warned, her eyes wide with concern. I left the diner feeling more unsettled than before. As night approached, I steeled myself for the inevitable tapping, knowing I would have to confront whatever was haunting me. That night, I sat in the middle of the bed, surrounded by pillows and blankets, determined to fend off sleep. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I felt a heaviness in the air. The tapping began, echoing through the walls, and the whispers followed, soft and pleading. "Help us. Don't leave us." I felt an overwhelming urge to respond, to reach out to whatever was calling to me. I gripped my phone tightly, ready to call Linda, but something deep inside me knew I needed to face this head on. "Who are you?" I shouted into the darkness. "What do you want?" For a moment, there was silence. Then the tapping intensified, growing more frantic, as if something was trying to break through the barriers between us. "Help us. Find us." The voices wailed, a haunting chorus that filled the room. My heart raced as fear gripped me. "I can't help you if I don't know who you are," I shouted, tears welling in my eyes. Suddenly, the whispers shifted, and I felt an icy breeze sweep through the room. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows that danced along the walls. "We are the forgotten," the voices murmured. "You must find us." In that moment, something within me snapped. I couldn't ignore their cries any longer. "I'll help you," I promised, my voice strong despite my fear. "Just tell me how." The following day I began digging deeper into the town's history, determined to uncover the truth behind the voices. I spent hours at the library, searching through old newspapers and town records. What I found sent chills down my spine. Years ago, Eldermere had experienced a string of mysterious disappearances. People spoke of a dark figure that roamed the town at night, seeking out those who dared to wander too far from home. As I pieced together the stories, I realized that the restless souls I had heard were connected to this dark figure, a manifestation of the town's unresolved grief and despair. That night, I prepared myself for another confrontation. Armed with knowledge and a candle for light, I settled into the center of the room. The tapping began almost immediately, and the whispers returned, more insistent than before. "Find us. Help us." "I know about the disappearances," I shouted, trying to assert control over the situation. "I know you're trapped." The room grew colder, and the shadows deepened. I felt a presence creeping closer, the air thick with sorrow. "You must release us," the voices cried, a chorus of anguish that filled my heart with pain. "Tell me how," I begged, desperation clawing at my throat. "Break the cycle," they whispered. "Face the darkness." With newfound determination, I resolved to confront the source of the darkness that haunted Eldermere. I spent the day gathering supplies, candles, sage, and salt, anything I could use to create a barrier against whatever malevolent force lingered in the shadows. That night, I set up a protective circle in my room, surrounding myself with the items I had gathered. The tapping grew louder, the whispers more frantic. "Help us. Help us." I took a deep breath, steadied my resolve, and began to chant the words I had found in an old book about protection against restless spirits. As I spoke, the room trembled, and I could feel the energy shifting. Suddenly, the door flew open, and a gust of wind extinguished my candles. I felt a cold presence sweep through the room, and the whispers turned into screams. "You cannot escape," they wailed. "You belong to us." But I stood firm, reciting the words with conviction. "I will not be bound by your darkness. You are not forgotten. I am here to help you find peace." As the words left my lips, the air grew still, and the shadows began to recede. A figure emerged from the darkness, a silhouette shrouded in mist. It reached out to me, its voice a haunting echo. "Help us." In that moment, I understood. The figure represented all the souls trapped in Eldermere, bound by the pain of their past. I stepped forward, breaking the barrier of my protective circle, and reached out to the figure. "I will help you find peace," I promised, my voice steady. The figure paused, and I could see sorrow etched in its features. "You must face the darkness within," it whispered, its voice trembling. "Only then can we be freed." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the memories of the town's tragedies to wash over me. The stories of lost lives and unresolved grief enveloped me, and I felt the weight of their pain in my heart. But I also felt the strength of my own spirit, the determination to bring them the peace they so desperately sought. "Together, we can break the cycle," I said, opening my eyes to meet the figure's gaze. "We will not let fear hold us anymore." As I spoke, the darkness began to lift, and I could feel the spirits surrounding me, their whispers turning into a harmonious melody. "Thank you," "Thank you," they murmured, their voices rising in a chorus of gratitude. In that moment, I felt a surge of energy, a warmth that spread through me. The figure reached out, its hand brushing against mine, and in that touch, I felt a profound connection. Together, we faced the darkness that had bound us, and with a final surge of will, I released the past. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, the room was filled with warmth. The oppressive weight that had hung over Eldermere lifted, and I felt a sense of peace enveloping the town. The whispers faded into a gentle hum, a soft reminder of the journey we had undertaken together. I stepped outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face for the first time since I arrived. The town seemed different. The colors were brighter, and the air was filled with a sense of renewal. I wandered through the streets, and for the first time I saw the people of Eldermere, smiling, greeting one another, their faces filled with a newfound light. I returned to the diner, where Linda greeted me with a beaming smile. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with hope. "I think I did," I replied, a sense of fulfillment washing over me. The town is free now. As I left the diner, I could hear laughter echoing through the streets. The sleepless town had finally found rest, and in helping them, I had found my own peace as well. I glanced back at the motel, now just a place where memories lingered, and smiled. I was grateful for my journey to Eldermere, a journey that had taught me the importance of facing the darkness, both within myself and in the world around me. As I drove away, I took one last look at the town, feeling a deep connection to the people who had once been trapped by their past. I knew that Eldermere would always hold a special place in my heart, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way to find the light. Story 6. I moved into the old Victorian house on a chilly autumn afternoon, the sun casting long shadows as I unloaded boxes from my car. My new home was everything I had dreamed of: tall ceilings, intricate woodwork, and a sprawling garden that seemed to go on forever. I had left the bustling city behind, yearning for a fresh start away from the chaos of my past. As I stepped inside, the door creaked ominously, echoing through the empty halls. The air was thick with dust and memories, and I could almost hear the whispers of those who had come before me. I shrugged off the unease that crept over me, reminding myself that this was a chance to rebuild my life. After unpacking my belongings, I set about making the space my own. The first night, I set up my bedroom on the second floor, the large windows offering a breathtaking view of the autumn trees. But as darkness fell, the house transformed. The shadows grew deeper, and the wind howled through the eaves, making the windows rattle. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The old house had a way of amplifying sounds, and every creak and groan felt magnified in the silence. I brushed it off as nerves, convincing myself that it was simply the house settling. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking and organizing. I spent my days exploring the quaint town nearby, meeting my neighbors, and familiarizing myself with the local shops. Everyone was friendly, eager to welcome me to the community, but they seemed to share a strange reluctance to talk about the house. One evening, I invited a neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, over for tea. She was a kind woman in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a bun. As we chatted, I mentioned my new home. "It's a beautiful house," she said, her smile faltering for just a moment. "But it has a history, you know?" "What kind of history?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "Oh, just the usual. Stories of odd noises and strange happenings. But don't mind those tales. Every old house has its quirks." Her voice was light, but her eyes were heavy with unspoken words. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Mrs. Thompson's words. Odd noises? I'd certainly experienced my fair share since moving in. I could have sworn I heard soft scratching sounds coming from the walls, but every time I pressed my ear to the surface, it fell silent. It wasn't until I found myself unable to sleep one night, tossing and turning in my bed, that the scratching returned. It was faint, but there, like fingernails dragging against wood. My heart raced, and I bolted upright, listening intently. Just the house settling, I told myself, but doubt crept in as I turned on the lamp. The soft light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. As the weeks turned into a month, the scratching evolved into a more deliberate tapping sound. It echoed through the walls at odd hours, always when I was alone. It wasn't the gentle creaking of an old house. It was a rhythmic beat, almost like a message being sent from somewhere within the depths of the structure. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was merely the sounds of pipes settling or rodents scurrying in the walls. But the more I tried to brush it off, the more it unsettled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was lurking just beyond my sight. One evening, while working late in the living room, the tapping grew louder. I paused, listening intently. It seemed to come from the wall directly behind my desk. With a sudden surge of bravery, I stood and approached the wall, placing my hand against the rough surface. "Hello?" I called, my voice wavering. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Just as I turned to walk away, the tapping resumed, a series of quick knocks that made my heart race. I pressed my ear against the wall, but nothing, only the pounding of my heart. "Get a grip, Emma," I muttered to myself, retreating to my desk. I tried to focus on my work, but the tapping continued, a persistent reminder that I was not alone. The following weekend, I decided to invite a few neighbors over for a small get-together. I thought some friendly faces might distract me from the odd sounds. As the evening progressed, the laughter and chatter filled the house, momentarily pushing away the eerie sensations that had plagued me. Just as I poured another round of drinks, I heard it, a distinct knock coming from the wall behind me. I froze, looking at my guests, hoping no one had noticed. But the conversation continued, and I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that the noise was just the house settling. However, later that night, after my guests had left and the house was quiet, I sat alone in the living room, staring into the dim glow of the fireplace. That's when I heard it again. This time, it was different. It was a low whisper, almost like a sigh, accompanied by the tapping. "Help me." I leaped to my feet, heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. The room fell silent, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I quickly turned off the lights and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. The next day, I called Mrs. Thompson, needing to know more about the house's history. When I arrived at her home, I could tell she was hesitant to speak. "It's just an old house, dear," she insisted. "They all have their quirks." "Mrs. Thompson, I've heard things, tapping and whispers," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to know if something happened here." She sighed, her expression softening. "There was a family who lived there many years ago. They had a young girl, a sweet child. One night, she disappeared without a trace. No one ever found her." "Do you think she's still here?" I asked, my heart racing. "Many believe she is. Some say her spirit is trapped, still seeking help," Mrs. Thompson said, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and sympathy. "Just be careful, dear. Spirits can be unpredictable." As I returned home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in my chest. I had to confront whatever was haunting me. That night, I armed myself with a flashlight and determined to search the house for any signs of the girl. I began my search in the basement, the air growing colder as I descended the creaky stairs. The space was dimly lit, filled with old furniture and boxes covered in dust. As I moved further inside, I noticed a strange outline on the wall, an irregular shape that caught my attention. With my flashlight, I examined it closely, running my fingers over the surface. It felt like a door, but there was no handle. I pressed against it, and to my surprise, it creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway. My heart raced as I stepped inside, the air growing colder still. The passage twisted and turned, leading me to a small, hidden room. As I entered, I was hit with a wave of sorrow. The walls were covered in drawings, childlike sketches of a little girl smiling, playing with a dog, and a family gathered together. In the corner, I spotted a small, worn teddy bear, its button eyes dull and faded. My breath caught in my throat. "Is this yours?" I whispered, feeling the weight of the room's sadness. Just then, the tapping returned, louder and more insistent than ever. I turned, startled, and saw the outline of a figure in the shadows. My heart raced as I took a step back. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing in the small space. The figure shifted, and I felt an overwhelming sense of despair wash over me. "Help me," the whisper returned, softer now, but filled with anguish. I stumbled back, my mind racing. "I will help you," I shouted, feeling a strange connection to the figure. "But you have to show me how." The air grew thick with energy, and the figure stepped forward, revealing a young girl with hollow eyes and a sad smile. "Find my family," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They need to know I'm here." "Where are they?" I asked, desperation rising in my chest. "Lost," she murmured, her form flickering like a candle flame. "Help me find them." Suddenly, the room was filled with a cacophony of voices, pleading and wailing. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I felt a surge of panic. "I promise I'll help you," I shouted over the noise. The figure reached out, and in that moment, I felt a rush of memories flooding my mind. Images of a family, laughter, and then a void of darkness. I gasped as I stumbled back, understanding washing over me. This girl was not the only one lost. Her entire family was trapped in the echoes of this house. Determined to uncover the truth, I began to research the family who had once lived in the house. I spent days poring over old records, newspaper clippings, and local lore. Each piece of information I found added depth to the girl's story. The family had been well liked in the community, but after the girl's disappearance, their lives had crumbled. Her parents had moved away, and rumors swirled around the house, painting it as a place of sorrow and darkness. I found their names: Charlotte, David, and their daughter, Lily. One rainy afternoon, I decided to visit the local archives. There, I discovered a collection of articles detailing the search for Lily. The town had rallied together, searching for the missing girl, but as days turned into weeks, hope faded. I felt a knot of sadness tighten in my chest. I needed to find them, Charlotte and David. Perhaps they had returned to town seeking closure, or maybe they had moved on, still haunted by their loss. I knew I had to reach out, to bring them the news of their daughter. After days of searching, I finally tracked down Charlotte. She had moved to a neighboring town but still kept a low profile, avoiding the memories that haunted her. Gathering my courage, I called her. "Hello," she answered, her voice hesitant. "Is this Charlotte?" "I'm Emma, and I live in the old Victorian house on Elm Street," I began, my heart racing. "I think I have something important to tell you about your daughter." There was a long silence on the other end before she spoke, her voice trembling. "What do you mean?" "I've been hearing her voice. I think she's still in the house, Charlotte. She's asking for help." Tears filled her voice as she replied, "I've always hoped she would come back, but I don't know if I can face it again." "I believe she wants you to find peace," I said gently. "If you can, please come to the house. I think it will help both of you." After a few moments, she finally agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, I'll come." The day Charlotte arrived, the air was charged with anticipation. I stood at the door, waiting for her, my heart pounding. When she stepped out of her car, I saw the weight of years etched in her face. Her eyes were haunted, and I could feel the sorrow radiating from her. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly as I led her inside. The house felt different that day, alive with an energy that pulsed through the walls. We moved to the hidden room where I had first encountered Lily's spirit. Charlotte gasped as she took in the drawings and the teddy bear. "Oh, Lily," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I had come to understand that the house was not just a structure but a vessel of memories, of love, loss, and redemption. My journey had taught me the importance of facing fears and finding the light even in the darkest of places. As I watched the sun set over the horizon, casting vibrant colors across the sky, I smiled. The stalker in the walls was no longer a haunting presence. It was a reminder of the love that could emerge from even the deepest of sorrows. I was finally home. Story 7. The day started like any other, gray and dreary, the sky hanging heavy with clouds that threatened rain. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring at the blank page of my journal, my mind a whirlpool of thoughts and emotions. It had been 6 months since my grandmother passed away, and each day felt like a struggle to remember her voice, her laughter, and the stories she used to tell me. As I absent-mindedly flipped through the mail, something caught my eye. An unmarked envelope, its edges crisp and new, stood out among the usual bills and junk mail. I picked it up, noticing the elegant script that read, "You are cordially invited to explore the Museum of Lost Memories." Intrigued, I opened the envelope. Inside, I found a small card with an embossed image of an old building and the museum's address. I had never heard of it, yet something about the invitation stirred a long-buried curiosity within me. That evening, I found myself standing before the imposing entrance of the museum. The Gothic architecture loomed over me, its spires piercing the cloudy sky like fingers reaching for the heavens. A shiver of anticipation ran down my spine. This was not just a museum. It was a place where the past lingered, and I felt an inexplicable pull toward it. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, I stepped inside and was immediately enveloped by the scent of old wood and polished glass. The air was cool and still, almost reverent. As I ventured deeper into the dimly lit hallways, I felt a strange sense of familiarity wash over me, as if I had been here before. "Welcome," a voice broke the silence. I turned to see an older man with sharp features and kind eyes standing behind a reception desk. His name tag read, "Mr. Eldridge, the museum's curator." "Thank you," I replied, a bit taken aback by his sudden appearance. I received an invitation, but I didn't know what to expect. Mr. Eldridge smiled knowingly. "Many come here seeking answers, closure, or simply a connection to the past. You are not alone." He guided me through the galleries, each room filled with relics and artifacts that seemed to breathe with stories untold. A wall lined with photographs caught my attention, black and white images of people from a bygone era. I felt an ache in my chest as I gazed at the faces, their smiles frozen in time. "Each photograph holds a memory," Mr. Eldridge explained. "Some are lost, others are merely forgotten." In one corner of the room, I spotted a collection of old toys, dolls with cracked faces, wooden trains, and stuffed animals that had seen better days. My fingers brushed over a particularly delicate music box, its surface etched with intricate designs. As I turned the key, a haunting melody filled the air. Instantly, I was transported back to my childhood. I could see my grandmother sitting in her favorite chair, the music box in her hands, her eyes twinkling as she told me stories of brave knights and enchanted lands. The warmth of those memories enveloped me like a hug, bringing a smile to my face. "Do you have a particular memory you're hoping to find?" Mr. Eldridge's voice pulled me from my reverie. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I just feel a connection to the past." He nodded thoughtfully. "The past shapes us, but it can also haunt us. Are you ready to confront what you may find?" Drawn by a force I couldn't explain, I wandered away from Mr. Eldridge and stumbled upon a heavy curtain at the end of the hallway. My heart raced as I pushed it aside, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by a solitary beam of light. Inside, I discovered a book of lost memories, resting on a pedestal, its leather cover cracked and worn. As I opened it, the pages revealed handwritten stories, photographs, and sketches, each entry resonating with emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I scanned the pages, feeling a mixture of sorrow and nostalgia. Each memory was a thread that wove together the fabric of a life once lived, stories of love and loss that echoed through time. I felt drawn to a particular entry, a tale of a young girl who had lost her family in a tragic accident. As I continued reading, a cold draft swept through the room. I looked up to find a translucent figure standing beside me, a young boy with bright eyes and a warm smile. "Who are you?" I gasped, stepping back in shock. "I'm Oliver," he replied softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been waiting for someone to help me." Recognition flooded over me. Oliver had been a boy from my childhood, someone I had played with before he mysteriously disappeared. My heart ached at the memory of his laughter and the joy he had brought into my life. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm lost," he said, his expression a mix of sadness and hope. "I need help to find my way home." As Oliver shared his story, the weight of my own grief began to lift. He revealed that he had been trapped in the museum since the day he vanished, a victim of the tragic event that had claimed his life. The sorrow of his past kept him tethered to this realm, unable to move on. "I never got to say goodbye," he confessed, tears glimmering in his eyes. My heart ached for him. I, too, was burdened by the weight of loss. My grandmother's passing had left a void in my life, one I had been struggling to fill. "I understand," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I lost someone important too, but we can help each other." Determined to help Oliver confront his past, I led him out of the hidden room and back into the main exhibit area. Together, we explored the various displays, each one triggering memories that had long been buried. In one room, we found a collection of old photographs depicting the town before the tragedy. There were smiling faces, happy families, and vibrant scenes of life. With each image, I could feel Oliver's spirit growing stronger, as if he were gathering the courage to face what had been lost. "Look at how happy they are," he said, pointing to a photograph of a family gathered in front of their home. I remember that day. I was so full of life. As we delved deeper into the museum, the atmosphere shifted. Memories that had once felt heavy began to lighten, filling the air with a sense of hope and possibility. "We need to remember the joy," I told Oliver. "It's what we owe to ourselves and to those we've lost." He nodded, a small smile breaking through his sorrow. "You're right. Maybe I can let go of the past." We continued our journey, uncovering not just memories of loss, but also dreams that had been forgotten. I shared stories of my grandmother's dreams of traveling the world, of seeing the northern lights, and of her love for painting. "She always told me to chase my dreams," I said, feeling the warmth of her memory wash over me. Maybe it's time I start doing that for her. Eventually, we arrived at the final exhibit, a representation of my grandmother. The display featured her favorite chair, the quilt she had made, and a framed photograph of us together, radiating warmth and love. In that moment, I felt my grandmother's spirit surrounding me. "Let go, my dear," her voice echoed in my mind. "Embrace the memories, but don't be bound by them." I turned to Oliver, who was watching me with a mixture of admiration and longing. "You have to let her go, too. She wants you to be free." As I stood at a crossroads, the weight of the past settled heavily on my shoulders. One path led back to the safety of my memories, while the other beckoned me forward into the unknown. "Will you let go?" I asked Oliver, my heart aching. He hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. "What if I forget them?" "You won't forget," I reassured him. "You'll carry them with you, but you can't let them hold you captive anymore." With that, he took a deep breath, determination flooding his features. "Okay, I want to be free." As Oliver and I held hands, I felt a surge of energy envelop us. Together, we confronted the pain of his past, the moment of his disappearance flashing vividly before us. "I forgive you, Oliver," I whispered. "You're free." In that moment, the museum began to transform. The air grew lighter, and the walls shimmered with a vibrant glow. I could feel Oliver's spirit beginning to fade. Yet he smiled at me, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice growing fainter. "You've set me free." As Oliver vanished, I felt a warmth wash over me, filling the void that had lingered in my heart since my grandmother's passing. I had helped him find peace, and in doing so, I had found my own. The museum had become a sanctuary of healing, and as I stepped out into the light, I understood that while memories shape us, they do not define us. I would carry my grandmother's love with me, embracing the joy she had imparted. I turned back for one last look at the museum. It was still shrouded in mist, but I knew it was no longer a prison of the past. It had become a beacon of hope for those willing to confront their lost memories. In the weeks that followed, I found myself returning to the museum. Each visit was a chance to reflect, to remember, and to heal. The memory of Oliver stayed with me, a reminder of the power of letting go and the importance of cherishing what we hold dear. I began to chase my own dreams, enrolling in art classes and exploring the world through my grandmother's eyes. With each brushstroke, I felt her presence guiding me, encouraging me to live fully and freely. The Museum of Lost Memories would always hold a special place in my heart, a sanctuary for those seeking closure and a testament to the beauty of memories, both lost and found. Story 8. I stood at the edge of whispering pines, the dense forest looming before me like a living entity. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced among the trees. It had been years since I last set foot in this place, and the memories flooded back with each breath of crisp pine-scented air. "Are you sure about this?" my best friend Sarah asked, glancing nervously at the woods. She had come with me for moral support, but even she could feel the strange energy radiating from the forest. I nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at my insides. I had come back to confront the past, to face the childhood fears that had haunted me since that fateful summer. The forest had always called to me, whispering secrets and drawing me closer. But it was also the place where I had lost my brother, Jake, years ago. As we stepped into the forest, the familiar sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds enveloped us. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the forest symphony wash over me. Memories swirled in my mind, days spent playing hide-and-seek, exploring hidden trails, and laughing as we built forts out of fallen branches. "Do you hear that?" Sarah suddenly said, her eyes wide with apprehension. I frowned, straining to listen. There was something there, a low murmur that seemed to beckon us deeper into the woods. "It's just the wind," I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced. The call of the forest was stronger than I remembered, pulling me toward the heart of the trees. After wandering for what felt like hours, we stumbled upon the old cabin. It was a dilapidated structure, its once bright paint now faded and peeling. Memories of summers spent playing in and around it washed over me, but I felt an unsettling chill creep up my spine. "This is where you found him, isn't it?" Sarah's voice broke through my reverie. I nodded, my throat tightening at the memory. Jake had always been the adventurous one, daring me to climb higher, run faster, and explore deeper. The day he disappeared was forever etched in my mind, a blur of panic and fear as I searched the woods for him. We had promised to stay together, but he had ventured off alone, drawn by something I couldn't comprehend. Inside the cabin, dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the cracked windows. As I explored the familiar space, I found remnants of our childhood, a rusted bicycle, an old board game, and a half-finished drawing on a piece of paper. I picked up the drawing, my heart aching as I traced my fingers over the sketches of us playing in the forest. "What are you looking for?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just feel like there's something I need to find, something I missed all those years ago." Suddenly, I heard it again, the low whispering that seemed to echo from the walls of the cabin. It was both haunting and inviting, urging me to uncover the secrets hidden within the forest. Determined to follow the sound, I led Sarah outside. We wandered deeper into the forest, each step taking us further from the safety of the cabin and closer to the heart of the woods. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around me like a cocoon, coaxing me to let go of my fears. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Sarah asked, glancing nervously at the darkening trees. "Trust me," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I need to do this. I need to understand what happened." As we continued through the dense underbrush, we emerged into a clearing bathed in golden light. The beauty of the scene took my breath away. Wildflowers danced in the breeze and a soft mist curled around the edges, giving the place an ethereal quality. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient tree, its gnarled roots stretching deep into the earth. Something about it felt alive, pulsating with energy that resonated with my very being. "This place is magical," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. I approached the tree, placing my hand on its rough bark. The whispers swelled, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Closing my eyes, I allowed myself to be enveloped by the sensation. Images flashed before my mind's eye. Memories of Jake laughing, running through the trees, his voice calling out to me. Suddenly, a memory broke through the fog, a memory I had tried to bury. I saw Jake's face, a mix of joy and mischief, as he urged me to follow him deeper into the forest. "Come on, there's something amazing over here," he had shouted, his laughter echoing in my ears. But then the memory shifted. I saw the moment I lost sight of him, the panic that surged within me as I called his name. I could feel the weight of my fear, the guilt of not being able to protect him. "Jake?" I cried, my voice echoing in the clearing. The trees seemed to sway in response, the whispers intensifying as if they were trying to tell me something. "Jess, we need to go," Sarah urged, her voice tinged with anxiety. I opened my eyes, and the clearing suddenly felt darker, the shadows stretching ominously. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I can't leave until I understand what happened." "Understand what?" Sarah asked, exasperation creeping into her tone. "You're scaring me." But I could feel it. The forest was alive, and it was calling me to uncover the truth. I had to confront the past, to find Jake and finally bring him home. I turned back to the ancient tree, feeling a connection that transcended time. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. I closed my eyes again, focusing on the energy that pulsed through the ground beneath my feet. "Show me," I whispered, my heart racing. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a deep rumbling sound resonated from within the tree. I stumbled back, but the pull of the forest was too strong. A gnarled root broke free, revealing a hidden passage that descended into darkness. "Just no," Sarah shouted, panic evident in her voice. "I have to," I replied, steeling my resolve. "I have to know the truth." I took a deep breath and stepped into the passage, the cool air wrapping around me like a shroud. The darkness closed in, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. The passage twisted and turned, the whispers growing louder with each step. Shadows danced along the walls, and I could sense the weight of history pressing down on me. I wasn't just searching for Jake, I was delving into the heart of the forest itself. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a small cavern. Flickering lights illuminated the space, revealing symbols carved into the walls. The air was thick with a sense of ancient power, and I felt a surge of energy course through me. "Jake," I called, my voice echoing in the silence. As I stepped further into the cavern, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. A boy, just as I remembered. My heart raced as I stepped closer, the recognition flooding over me like a tidal wave. "Jake!" I gasped, my voice trembling with disbelief. He turned to me, a smile spreading across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Jess," he said, his voice soft yet haunting. "I've been waiting for you." Tears filled my eyes as I reached out to him, but something held me back. "What happened? Why did you leave me?" He hesitated, his expression shifting to one of sorrow. "I didn't mean to. I was drawn here, to the heart of the forest. There's something I need to show you." With a nod, Jake turned and led me deeper into the cavern. The whispers intensified, guiding us toward a massive wall covered in glowing symbols. I felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, as if the forest had been waiting for me all along. "This is the heart of the forest," Jake explained, his voice echoing in the cavern. "It's alive, Jess. It remembers everything, every joy, every sorrow. It holds the memories of those who've come before us." I reached out to touch the wall, and a surge of energy coursed through me. Images flooded my mind. Memories of laughter, of play, of the summer days we spent exploring these woods. But then the memories twisted, darkening into the day he disappeared. "I was scared," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "The forest called to me, and I followed. I didn't mean to leave you." The weight of the past hung heavy in the air as I faced Jake. "You can come back with me," I urged. "We can leave this place together." He shook his head, his expression resolute. "I can't. I'm bound to the forest now. But you can find peace, Jess. You have to let me go." Tears streamed down my face as the truth settled in. I had spent so long holding on to guilt and pain, but the forest had shown me that it was time to release that burden. "I love you, Jake," I whispered, my heart breaking. "I'll never forget you." He smiled sadly, and the air around us shimmered with a warm glow. "I'll always be with you, Jess. In your heart, in your memories." As I stepped back, the symbols on the wall began to pulse with light. The cavern trembled as the energy surged, and I knew our time together was drawing to a close. "Thank you for finding me," Jake said, his voice echoing in the depths of my soul. "Now go, live your life." I nodded, a mixture of sorrow and acceptance washing over me. With one last look at my brother, I turned and ran back toward the passage, the whispers of the forest guiding me home. Bursting out of the darkness, I emerged into the clearing, breathless and alive. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays through the trees. Sarah rushed to my side, her face a mask of concern. "Jess, I was so worried," she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around me. "I'm okay," I assured her, feeling a newfound strength within me. "I found him, Sarah. I found Jake." As we made our way back through the forest, I could feel the energy of the trees around me, the whispers now transformed into a gentle song. The forest had shared its secrets, allowing me to confront my fears and heal the wounds of the past. Weeks turned into months, and I returned to Whispering Pines often. Each visit brought me closer to understanding the connection I had with the forest and my brother. I learned to appreciate the beauty of the woods, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, and the melodies of the creatures that called it home. I began volunteering at the local community center, sharing my experiences with others who had lost loved ones. My heart swelled as I helped them navigate their grief, just as the forest had guided me. One crisp autumn day, as I walked through the forest, I paused at the ancient tree that had brought me so much solace. The leaves were turning golden, the air filled with the scent of earth and decay, yet I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. "Thank you," I whispered to the tree, knowing it held the memories of those who had come before. "Thank you for helping me find my way." I closed my eyes, allowing the whispers of the forest to wash over me, reminding me that while the past would always be a part of me, I had the power to shape my own future. As I stepped forward, the forest responded, wrapping me in its embrace, reminding me that the call of the woods was not just a reminder of loss, but also a celebration of life and the beauty of memories cherished. Years later, I stood at the edge of the forest once more, this time with my own children by my side. They laughed and played, their joy echoing through the trees. I smiled, knowing that the forest would continue to whisper its secrets to those who were willing to listen. "Can we explore, Mom?" my youngest asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "Of course," I replied, taking their hands in mine. "The forest is waiting for us." As we ventured into the woods, I felt the warmth of my brother's spirit beside me, guiding us through the trees. The call of the forest was alive, a reminder that life continues, love endures, and the memories we hold dear will always be a part of us. Story 9. It was a rainy afternoon when we first arrived at the old farmhouse. The sky was a slate gray, heavy with clouds that threatened to unleash a downpour at any moment. As I stepped out of the car, the scent of wet earth and damp wood filled my lungs. The farmhouse stood like a relic from a forgotten time, its weathered wooden boards and peeling paint whispering tales of a past long gone. My parents had decided that we needed a change, a break from the chaos of our city lives. They spoke of the beauty of the countryside, of peace and quiet. But as I surveyed the looming house, I felt an unsettling chill creep down my spine. There was something about the place that felt off. "Come on, Ella, help me with the bags," my mother called, her voice bright and cheerful, oblivious to the heaviness that hung in the air. I sighed and grabbed a suitcase from the trunk, trudging toward the house. As I crossed the threshold, the old wooden door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit foyer. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by a weak beam of sunlight that slipped through a grimy window. The interior was just as neglected as the exterior, with faded wallpaper peeling at the edges and the floorboards groaning under my weight. "Isn't it charming?" my mother exclaimed, spinning around to take it all in. My father nodded, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He was the pragmatic one, always weighing the pros and cons. "Sure, charming," I muttered under my breath, already regretting the decision to leave the city behind. I longed for the vibrant life I had left, my friends, and the routine that brought me comfort. After unpacking, my parents busied themselves with settling in, leaving me alone to explore the house. I wandered through the rooms, each one filled with relics of the past. Old photographs, dusty furniture, and cracked mirrors that seemed to reflect shadows rather than light. The air felt thick, almost alive, as if the house itself was watching me. Curiosity urged me to explore the attic, a place that had always intrigued me in old houses. I found the rickety stairs leading up and ascended cautiously. The air grew colder as I reached the top, and I flicked on the light switch. The bulb flickered before illuminating the cramped space, revealing boxes stacked haphazardly and covered in dust. I picked through the boxes, uncovering forgotten treasures. Books with yellowed pages, faded toys, and old clothes that had long lost their vibrancy. Among the items I found a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was beautiful, the craftsmanship exquisite, and as I picked it up, I felt a strange pull, as if the box was calling to me. "Ella," my mother's voice echoed from below. "Dinner's ready." I reluctantly set the box down and made my way back downstairs, the feeling of being watched still lingering in the air. As I joined my parents at the table, I tried to shake off the unease that clung to me like a second skin. That evening, as the storm rolled in, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. My parents settled in front of the fireplace, the crackling flames casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls. I retreated to my room, hoping to find some solace in my books. As I lay in bed, rain pelted against the window, creating a rhythmic patter that almost lulled me to sleep. But just as I began to drift off, a soft sound echoed through the darkness, a faint whisper, like a child's giggle. I shot up in bed, my heart racing. The sound seemed to come from somewhere within the house, but I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. I turned over, pulling the covers tightly around me, but sleep eluded me. The whisper returned, louder this time, more distinct. It sounded playful, yet eerie. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and tiptoed toward the door, feeling the cool wood beneath my fingers. With every step I took, the whispers grew clearer, beckoning me to follow. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the moon filtering through the windows. As I crept toward the source of the sound, I felt a mix of fear and curiosity tugging at my insides. My heart raced, and I hesitated, wondering if I should return to the safety of my room. But the whisper called to me, weaving a spell of intrigue that I couldn't resist. I moved forward, the floor creaking beneath my weight. The whispers led me down the hallway to a door at the end, slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I was met with a small, dusty room filled with forgotten memories. It looked like a child's playroom, with old toys scattered about and faded drawings hanging on the walls. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed a figure in the corner, a small child, dressed in tattered clothes, staring out the window. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The child turned slowly, revealing wide, hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. "I'm waiting," the child said softly, their voice echoing in the silence. "Waiting for someone to play with me." The child's presence filled me with an overwhelming sense of sadness. There was something haunting about their gaze, something that felt deeply unsettling. "Play with you?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Yes," the child replied, stepping closer. "I've been alone for so long." I felt an inexplicable pull toward the child, as if I were being drawn into their world. "What's your name?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "They call me the unseen child," the figure replied, their eyes glimmering with an otherworldly light. "But I want to be seen. I want to be free." Trying to lighten the mood, get a feel for the land. The thought of stepping outside, away from the suffocating presence of the house, excited me. "Sure, let's do it." After breakfast, we ventured outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and fresh. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of wet grass and earth. The property stretched out before us, a vast expanse of untamed wilderness. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches whispering secrets I couldn't understand. My parents chatted about renovations and plans for the future, but my mind was elsewhere, still haunted by the unseen child. "Ella, come look at this," my mother called, pointing to a dilapidated barn in the distance. It stood forlornly at the edge of the property, its roof sagging and walls crumbling. I hesitated, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. "Do we have to?" I asked, a flicker of apprehension in my voice. "Of course, it might be full of hidden treasures," my father replied, a glint of excitement in his eyes. Reluctantly, I followed them toward the barn, the feeling of being watched intensifying with each step. The barn creaked as we stepped inside, the air stale and filled with dust. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the walls, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Old farming equipment lay scattered around, covered in cobwebs, remnants of a time long past. As my parents began rummaging through the items, I wandered deeper into the barn. I felt an inexplicable pull toward a corner, where the light seemed to fade. As I approached, I noticed a small door, barely visible behind a stack of old crates. My heart raced as I reached for the handle. "Ella, come check this out," my father called, but I was too intrigued to respond. I opened the door, revealing a dark space beyond. A faint light flickered from within, and the whispers returned, swirling around me like a familiar melody. The air felt charged with energy, and I stepped inside, drawn by an unseen force. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a hidden room filled with dusty relics and forgotten memories. My heart raced as I stepped inside, the whispers growing louder, calling me deeper into the shadows. There were old toys, a rocking horse with chipped paint, and a small bed tucked into the corner, as if a child had once slept there. The walls were adorned with faded drawings, colorful crayon sketches of animals and trees all marked by time. But the most striking feature was a large, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. It was framed in ornate gold, its surface tarnished but still reflecting a hint of light. I approached it cautiously, feeling an irresistible pull toward my reflection. As I gazed into the mirror, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm. I could see my own face, but something was different. Behind me, a shadow flickered, a glimpse of the unseen child lurking just out of sight. "Play with me," the child's voice echoed, soft yet haunting. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart pounded in my chest and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. "I'm not afraid," I whispered, though my voice trembled. The mirror seemed to pulse with energy, and I reached out a hand, my fingers brushing against the surface. Instantly, a jolt of electricity shot through me, and images flashed before my eyes. Memories of laughter, joy, and an overwhelming sense of loss. I could see the unseen child, playing in the sunlight, their laughter ringing through the air. But the images shifted, darkening as shadows began to creep in, swallowing the light and happiness. "Help me!" the child's voice pleaded, echoing in my mind. I pulled my hand back, heart racing as I stumbled away from the mirror. I had to tell my parents. They needed to know what was happening. I rushed back to the main area of the barn, where my parents were still sifting through the remnants of the past. "Mom, Dad," I called, my voice filled with urgency. "What is it, Ella?" my father asked, concern etched on his face. "There's a room in the barn," I said breathlessly. "And a mirror. It's not just a mirror. I think it's connected to the child." "What child?" my mother asked, her brow furrowed. "The unseen child," I exclaimed. "I met them last night, and I think they're trapped here." My parents exchanged skeptical glances, and I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. "You have to believe me," I insisted. "I felt it. I felt their sadness." "Ella, it's just an old house," my father said gently. "It's easy to let your imagination get the best of you in a place like this." "But I heard them. I saw them," I pleaded, my heart sinking as their disbelief hung in the air. My mother stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Let's go look at this room together. Maybe it will help ease your mind." Reluctantly, I led them back to the hidden room. As we entered, I felt a chill settle around us, the air thick with unspoken secrets. The mirror stood in the center, dark and foreboding. "There it is," I said, pointing at it. "That's the mirror. I felt something when I touched it." My father approached, studying it carefully. "It's just a mirror, Ella. There's nothing wrong with it." "But," I started, but he raised a hand to stop me. "I'll prove it," he said, stepping closer. As my father leaned in to inspect the mirror, I held my breath, anxiety swirling within me. He reached out and placed his palm against the surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room fell silent, the whispers fading into an eerie stillness. Suddenly, the mirror began to shimmer, and a cold breeze swept through the room, chilling us to the bone. My heart raced as I watched my father's reflection shift. In the mirror, the shadows twisted and writhed, revealing the outline of the unseen child, standing behind him. Their hollow eyes locked onto mine. "Help me," the child whispered, their voice echoing like a distant memory. My father stumbled back, eyes wide with fear. "What the hell was that?" he gasped, clearly shaken. "See, I told you," I shouted, my heart racing with both fear and exhilaration. My parents exchanged frantic glances, the gravity of the situation finally settling in. "Ella, we need to leave," my mother said, panic creeping into her voice. "No, we can't just leave," I protested. "The child needs our help. They're trapped here." "Trapped by what?" my father asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "The shadows," I replied, my voice trembling. "I think they're holding the child captive." My mother shook her head. "We don't know what we're dealing with. This could be dangerous." But something in me wouldn't let it go. I felt a connection to the unseen child, a bond that urged me to help. "Please, we can't turn our backs on this. We have to find a way to free them." My father sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he contemplated our options. "All right, let's investigate this further," he said reluctantly. "But we need to be careful." We spent the rest of the day searching the farmhouse for any clues about the unseen child. We scoured the attic, basement, and every room, hoping to find something that would explain the child's presence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ground, I stumbled upon a dusty old journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my room. The leather cover was cracked and worn, and my fingers trembled as I opened it. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting, detailing the life of a family that once lived in the house. As I read, a story unfolded. A tale of a young girl named Clara who'd lived here many years ago. Clara was a lively child, adored by her family, but tragedy struck when she fell ill and passed away. The journal described her parents' grief and their desperate attempts to reach out to her spirit, hoping to keep her memory alive. As I read, a chilling realization washed over me. Clara was the unseen child. Her spirit lingered in the house, trapped by the sorrow of her parents, unable to find peace. I shared my discovery with my parents, and their expressions shifted from disbelief to understanding. Clara's spirit is bound to this place, I explained. She's the one we've been hearing. What do we do? My father asked, his voice tinged with concern. We need to help her find peace, I replied, determination filling me. We need to connect with her spirit and release her from the shadows. Do you think that's possible? My mother asked, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I have to believe it is, I said firmly. That night, we gathered in the hidden room, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. I placed the journal on the floor, the weight of its secrets pressing down on us. Clara, I called softly, my voice steady. We're here to help you. The air around us grew colder, and the shadows seemed to dance in the corners of the room. Help me, a voice echoed, familiar yet distant. We want to set you free, I said, my heart pounding. You don't have to be alone anymore. The shadows writhed, and the unseen child appeared before us, their form flickering like a candle flame. Free? Clara's voice whispered, laced with longing. Yes, I said, stepping forward. You deserve to be at peace. But as I reached out, the shadows surged forward, a dark tide that threatened to engulf us. No, I shouted, fear gripping my heart as the darkness clawed at Clara, trying to pull her back. Stay back, my father yelled, positioning himself protectively in front of me. We won't let you take her. The shadows hesitated, as if weighing their options. You cannot save her, they hissed, their voices a cacophony of anger and sorrow. Yes, we can, I cried, determination surging within me. Clara, you must fight. You have to choose light over darkness. In that moment, I felt a surge of energy fill the room. Clara's form flickered, and the shadows writhed in agitation. Choose, Clara, I urged, my voice rising above the chaos. I want to be free. Clara's voice rang out, strong and clear, cutting through the darkness. The shadows recoiled, their grip on her loosening as she stepped forward, reaching for me. Help me, she cried, her eyes shining with hope. I extended my hand, feeling an electric connection as our fingers brushed. The shadows howled in fury, swirling around us, but Clara and I stood firm. Together, I shouted, and as if responding to my command, the room exploded with light. The shadows shrieked, their dark forms disintegrating in the radiant glow. Clara's spirit glowed brighter, and I felt her warmth envelop me. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. With a final burst of energy, the shadows dissolved, and Clara's spirit ascended, leaving behind a shimmering light that filled the room. As the light faded, I collapsed to the ground, breathless but relieved. My parents rushed to my side, their eyes wide with disbelief and awe. What just happened? My father asked, his voice trembling. We set her free, I replied, tears streaming down my face. Clara is finally at peace. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the farmhouse shifted. The heaviness that had once clung to the air dissipated, replaced by a sense of warmth and lightness. I could feel Clara's presence lingering, but it was no longer haunting. It felt comforting, like a gentle embrace. We spent our days exploring the land, breathing in the fresh air, and cherishing the newfound connection we had forged with the past. The farmhouse, once a source of fear, became a place of healing and renewal. As we settled into our new life, I realized that the unseen child had forever changed me. Clara's story had intertwined with mine, and her spirit had taught me the importance of love, friendship, and the power of letting go. The farmhouse stood tall, a guardian of memories and secrets, but it was no longer just a house. It had become a home, a sanctuary filled with light, laughter, and the echoes of a little girl who had finally found her peace. Story 10. The winding road to Willow Creek was as familiar to me as the back of my hand, yet it felt different this time. The trees lining the path stood tall and foreboding, their gnarled branches swaying gently in the autumn breeze. I had spent the last 4 years in the city, chasing dreams and drowning out the memories of my childhood in this small village. But now, as I drove closer to home, the weight of nostalgia pressed heavily on my chest. Willow Creek had always been a place of secrets, cloaked in the whispers of its residents. I remembered stories told by my grandmother about the blood moon, a phenomenon that occurred once every 20 years, when the moon hung low and red, casting an eerie glow over the land. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, warning outsiders to steer clear during that time. Yet, as a child, I had always been fascinated by the mystery surrounding it. Arriving in the village, I parked my car in front of the old farmhouse my parents had owned for generations. The paint was peeling, and the garden lay overgrown, but it still held a charm that tugged at my heartstrings. I took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling my lungs, and stepped out into the crisp air. My parents had gone for the weekend, leaving me with the house and the memories of my childhood. I walked inside, the familiar creaks of the floorboards greeting me like an old friend. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through the windows, illuminating the faded photographs that lined the walls. As I wandered through the rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was just my imagination, I told myself, but a shiver ran down my spine. I decided to explore the village, hoping to reconnect with old friends and shake off the lingering unease. I strolled down the main street, noticing how little had changed. The bakery still stood at the corner, its sweet aroma wafting through the air, and the old library was just as I remembered. But as I passed by the town square, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Villagers moved about their business with an air of tension, their conversations low and hurried. "Clara!" a voice called out, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Maya, my childhood friend. Her bright smile brought warmth to my heart. "Hey, Maya," I replied, embracing her. "It's been too long." "Too long indeed. You look great. Are you back for good?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I'm just here for a bit, helping out with the house. What's been happening around here?" Maya hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "You've heard about the blood moon, right?" I nodded, memories of my grandmother's tales flooding back. "Yeah, I remember. It's supposed to be happening soon, isn't it?" Maya's expression turned serious. "It's different this time. There are rumors, some say the rituals are coming back. You should be careful, Clara. Some things are better left in the past." "What kind of rituals?" I pressed, curiosity piqued. Before Maya could respond, a loud bell tolled from the church, echoing through the village. She flinched, her eyes darting toward the sound. "I have to go." "Just be careful," she whispered before hurrying away. The conversation left me unsettled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked beneath the surface of Willow Creek. I decided to visit the old library, hoping to find some answers in the dusty archives of our village's history. The library was quiet, the air thick with the smell of aged paper and leather. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers over the spines of books that held secrets of the past. After a few minutes of searching, I found an old leather-bound book titled The History of Willow Creek. I settled into a worn-out armchair and began to read. The book chronicled the village's founding and its strange customs, including the blood moon ritual. As I read, I learned that every 20 years the villagers would gather to honor the blood moon, performing rituals to appease ancient spirits. The details were vague, but one line stood out. To invoke the spirits, a blood sacrifice must be made. My heart raced as I continued reading, discovering more about the mysterious disappearances that plagued the village during the blood moon. Each time, a villager would go missing, only to be found later, changed and haunted by their experience. I felt a chill run down my spine as the pieces began to connect. The blood moon was more than just a tradition. It was a dark legacy that the villagers had tried to forget. I left the library, the weight of the book heavy in my hands. I couldn't shake the feeling that the villagers were keeping something from me, something crucial to understanding the blood moon and the rituals associated with it. That evening, I attended a gathering at the town hall, where the villagers discussed preparations for the upcoming blood moon. As I entered the hall, I felt the tension in the air, the murmurs of worry and fear swirling around me. I spotted Maya across the room and made my way to her. "What's going on?" I asked, concern lacing my voice. "They're planning something," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard the elders talking about sacrifices. They're determined to uphold the old ways." "Sacrifices? What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Maya shook her head. "I don't know, but it can't be good. We need to stop them." The meeting commenced, and the village elders took their place at the front. Their faces were grim, their eyes glinting with something dark and unyielding. They spoke of the blood moon, its power, and the need for sacrifices to ensure the village's safety. The crowd murmured in agreement, but I felt a wave of panic rise within me. This was not the village I remembered, and the sense of dread deepened as I realized how deeply ingrained these rituals were in their culture. As the night of the blood moon approached, the village seemed to hold its breath. I spent my days researching in the library and my nights tossing and turning in my childhood bedroom, haunted by the dark tales I had uncovered. On the night of the blood moon, I stood outside, the moon casting an eerie red glow over the village. The air was thick with tension, and I could hear the distant chanting of the villagers as they gathered at the old stone altar deep in the woods. Unable to shake my curiosity, I decided to follow them. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but I felt compelled to uncover the truth. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the chanting grew louder, the sound resonating through the trees. I could feel the energy in the air, crackling with anticipation. I soon found myself at the clearing where the altar stood, a massive stone structure adorned with symbols I couldn't decipher. The villagers surrounded the altar, their faces obscured by shadows. I hid behind a tree, my heart racing as I witnessed the ritual unfold before me. The village elders stood at the front, chanting in an ancient language, their voices rising and falling like a haunting melody. As the moon reached its zenith, a hush fell over the crowd. A figure was brought forth, a young man from the village, his face pale and frightened. My heart sank as I realized what was about to happen. "Blood must be shed to appease the spirits," one elder proclaimed, raising a ceremonial dagger high above his head. I couldn't stand by any longer. I burst from my hiding place, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the night. The villagers turned to me in shock, their chants faltering. The elder's eyes narrowed. "You should not be here, Clara," he warned, his voice low and menacing. "Let him go," I cried, stepping forward. "This isn't right. You can't sacrifice anyone." The young man looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. "You don't understand the power of the blood moon," the elder hissed. "We must make this sacrifice to ensure our survival." I felt a surge of courage. "No, there must be another way. You can't continue this cycle of darkness." The tension in the clearing was palpable, the villagers exchanging glances filled with uncertainty. But the elder remained resolute, his grip tightening on the dagger. The air crackled with energy as the villagers began to murmur among themselves. I could see doubt creeping into their eyes, but the elder's voice boomed, attempting to regain control. "Do not listen to her. She knows nothing of our traditions." But I refused to back down. "I know enough. This ritual only brings suffering. It's time to break the cycle and find another way to honor the spirits." The villagers hesitated, glancing at one another, and I could feel the tide beginning to turn. Suddenly, Elias stepped forward, his voice steady and unwavering. "She speaks the truth. We have allowed fear to dictate our actions for too long. It's time for a change." The crowd stirred, whispers spreading like wildfire. The elder's face twisted with rage. "You would betray our traditions for this outsider?" Elias held his ground. "It's not betrayal, it's evolution. We can honor the blood moon without sacrificing a life." The young man's eyes sparkled with hope, and I felt a surge of determination. "Let's find a way to honor the spirits that doesn't involve bloodshed. We can create a new tradition, one that brings the village together instead of tearing it apart." For a moment, Silence enveloped the clearing as the villagers considered our words. The elder's face was a mask of fury, but the murmurs among the crowd grew louder. Finally, one voice broke through the chaos, a woman I recognized from my childhood. Perhaps it is time to change. The tension broke like a wave crashing against the shore. The villagers began to nod, their faces shifting from fear to resolve. "Very well," the elder said, his voice strained. "But if we do this, we must find another way to appease the spirits. The blood moon demands a price." "We'll find a way," I promised, my heart racing. Together. With the elder's reluctant agreement, the crowd began to disperse, murmurs of hope replacing the once ominous chants. As we made our way back to the village, I felt a sense of unity growing among us, the darkness that had once loomed over Willow Creek beginning to lift. In the following days, the village came together to create new traditions to honor the blood moon. We held meetings to discuss how we could celebrate the moon's beauty without sacrificing a life. The night of the blood moon finally arrived, but instead of a ritual of fear, we celebrated with music, dance, and feasting. The once ominous altar was adorned with flowers and lanterns, casting a warm glow that chased away the shadows. As the moon rose high in the sky, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The villagers danced and laughed, their spirits lifted as they embraced the change. But as the festivities continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness wasn't entirely gone. A chill ran through the air, and I glanced up at the blood moon, its crimson hue glowing ominously. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard whispers outside my window. Shadows flickered in the moonlight, and I sat up, my heart racing. I could feel a presence lingering in the darkness, watching. I crept to the window, peering out into the night. The village lay peaceful, but I could sense something lurking just beyond the edge of the woods. The stories of old whispered in my mind, the spirits that demanded a price, the darkness that had clung to Willow Creek for generations. I knew the blood moon was just the beginning. The ritual had changed, but the threat was still there, waiting for its moment to strike. The celebrations continued into the night, laughter and music filling the air, but I felt a nagging sense of dread creeping up my spine. The blood moon hung low in the sky, its glow bathing the village in an otherworldly light. The warmth of the festivities felt like a thin veil over an impending storm, one that I could sense but not see. As the villagers danced around the altar, I pulled away from the crowd, seeking solace in the shadows of the trees. The laughter faded into the background as I wandered deeper into the woods, the familiar path leading me away from the safety of the village. I needed to clear my mind, to dispel the ominous feeling that clung to me like a second skin. I wandered through the forest, the cool night air sending shivers down my spine. The trees loomed above me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. In the distance, I could still hear the faint echoes of celebration. But the deeper I ventured into the woods, the quieter it became. As I reached a small clearing, I stopped and took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Suddenly, I felt it again, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" Silence enveloped me, the stillness of the night thickening. Just as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. My heart pounded as I turned, only to be met with the shadows dancing among the trees. "Clara?" The voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it sent a jolt of fear through me. I squinted into the darkness, trying to discern who or what had spoken my name. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice firmer this time, though fear still clawed at the edges of my mind. "Clara, you must listen." The voice faded into the night, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. I took a step back, my instincts screaming for me to run, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something much larger than myself. I stumbled back toward the village, the weight of the woods pressing down on me as I felt the shadows shift behind me. The closer I got to the sound of laughter and music, the more I felt a sense of safety return. Rejoining the festivities, I was greeted with friendly smiles and cheerful faces, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maya approached me, her brow furrowed with concern. "Clara, are you okay? You look pale," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I heard something in the woods. Someone called my name, I confessed, the words spilling from my lips before I could stop them. Probably just the wind, Maya replied dismissively, but I could see the flicker of worry in her eyes. Don't let it get to you. We're all safe here. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, I was a tempest of emotions. As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted. Laughter turned to nervous chatter, and the villagers began to glance uneasily toward the woods, as if they could sense the unease lingering just outside our celebrations. The elders gathered at the altar, their faces grave as they whispered amongst themselves. I caught snippets of their conversation, talk of rituals, ancient customs, and the spirits that demanded respect. What are they planning? I asked Maya, feeling a knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. I don't know. It's not like them to act this way during the blood moon celebrations. They're supposed to be joyful, she replied, her voice tinged with fear. As I turned to observe the elders more closely, I felt a chill in the air, a whisper of something dark weaving through the trees. The blood moon hung low, a crimson eye watching us all. The night finally drew to a close, the villagers slowly dispersing as fatigue set in. I returned to my childhood home, the familiar creaks of the floorboards greeting me. But the comfort of home was overshadowed by the lingering dread I couldn't shake. I climbed into bed, the shadows in my room feeling heavier than usual. Sleep eluded me, the night stretching into an eternity as I replayed the events of the evening. Just as I began to drift into a restless sleep, a noise jolted me awake. Soft footsteps outside my door. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps paused, and then I heard a soft knock. Clara? It was Elias, his voice low and urgent. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and opened the door, finding him standing in the hallway, his expression serious. Elias, what's wrong? I asked, my heart racing. I need to talk to you, he said, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. It's about the blood moon and what the elders are planning. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. What's going on? They're preparing for a different kind of ritual this time, Elias explained, his voice barely above a whisper. One that could bring forth the spirits they've angered in the past. I overheard them speaking about a sacrifice. My stomach dropped at the implication. But we stopped that. We changed the tradition. Not entirely, he said, his brow furrowed in concern. They're determined to maintain their hold over the spirits. They believe they must appease them or face the consequences. What consequences? I asked, my voice trembling. Elias ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his demeanor. I don't know, but I can feel it. There's a darkness creeping into the village. It's already begun. What do we do? I asked, desperation creeping into my tone. I think we need to gather some of the villagers who feel the same way we do. We have to confront the elders and put an end to this once and for all, Elias said, determination flashing in his eyes. I nodded, adrenaline coursing through me. Let's do it. As dawn broke, the village was quiet, the remnants of the night's festivities lingering in the air like a ghost. Elias and I spent the morning gathering our old friends, Maya, Liam, and Sarah, all of whom had grown up in Willow Creek, but had since distanced themselves from the village's darker traditions. We met at the old well at the center of the village, a place steeped in memories. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground as we huddled together, the weight of our mission palpable. I can't believe they're going to try this again, Maya said, shaking her head. I thought we were done with the blood moon rituals. Apparently some people are not ready to let go, Elias replied, his voice steady. We need to unite the villagers against this. We have to convince them that the spirits don't demand blood anymore. Liam crossed his arms, a skeptical look on his face. What if they refuse to listen? The elders have a lot of power in this village. Then we make our voices louder, I asserted, feeling the fire of determination building within me. We can't let fear dictate our lives any longer. As we shared our concerns, I could see the flicker of hope in my friends' eyes. They had felt the tension, the shift in the atmosphere, and they were willing to stand with me against it. We'll do this together, Sarah said, her voice firm, for the village. That evening, we gathered at the town hall, our hearts pounding as we prepared to confront the elders. The building felt different in the twilight, shadows clinging to the corners like specters. As we entered, the elders were already assembled, their faces grim and somber. They looked up as we approached, surprise flickering across their features. "What is the meaning of this?" one elder demanded, his tone sharp. "We need to talk about the blood moon and the sacrifices," I began, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "We cannot go back to the way things were. The rituals must stop." "Who do you think you are?" another elder snapped, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand the ways of this village." "Then help us understand," Elias urged, stepping forward. "We've all felt the darkness creeping in. The spirits demand respect, not blood." A murmur rippled through the assembly, and I could see doubt starting to take root in the faces of some elders. "You're risking everything we've built," one elder exclaimed, anger flashing in his eyes. "Or we're saving it," I countered, feeling the passion rising within me. "We can honor the spirits in a different way. We can break the cycle of fear and sacrifice." Silence enveloped the room, the tension thick enough to slice through. The elders exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Finally, one elder spoke up. "If you feel so strongly, present us with a new way to honor the blood moon, something that will appease the spirits without bloodshed." "We will," I replied, my heart racing with hope. "Together, we can create a new tradition that unites the village and honors the spirits in a way that brings us all closer." In the following days, the village worked tirelessly to create a new tradition, one that would honor the blood moon without sacrificing a life. We gathered ideas from every corner of Willow Creek, ensuring that everyone had a voice in the process. As the new moon approached, the villagers came together to decorate the altar with flowers, fruits, and tokens of gratitude for the spirits. Laughter and joy replaced the dark whispers of the past, and I felt a sense of unity growing among us. On the night of the new moon, the village lit lanterns, illuminating the path to the altar. As we gathered, I felt the energy shifting, the anticipation building as we prepared to honor the blood moon in our own way. I stood before the villagers, my heart swelling with pride as I looked at their faces illuminated by the lanterns. "Tonight, we honor the blood moon, not with fear or sacrifice, but with gratitude and community. We celebrate life and the bonds that tie us together." The villagers cheered, their voices rising into the night, drowning out the lingering whispers of the past. As we joined hands and danced around the altar, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But even as we celebrated, I could feel a shift in the air. The darkness lingered at the edges of the festivities. Watching, waiting. In the days following the new moon, the village thrived. Laughter echoed through the streets, and the shadows that had once haunted Willow Creek began to fade. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had not fully escaped the darkness. One evening, as I was closing the library, I noticed an old book lying open on a table, one that hadn't been there before. Intrigued, I picked it up and began to read. The pages were filled with tales of the blood moon, ancient rituals, and the spirits that demanded respect. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read about a spirit that was angered by the rejection of sacrifice, one that sought retribution against those who defied tradition. A knock at the door startled me, pulling me from my thoughts. I turned to find Elias standing there, concern etched across his face. "Clara, we need to talk," he said, his voice urgent. "There have been strange occurrences in the village. People are reporting sightings of shadowy figures in the woods." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "People claim they can hear whispers at night, voices calling their names. It's like the spirits are angry," Elias explained, his eyes filled with worry. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "We thought we had appeased them. We did everything right." "Maybe not," he said, his voice grim. "I think we need to revisit the old texts and find out more about the spirits and their rituals. We can't ignore this." I nodded, a sense of urgency washing over me. "Let's gather the others and see what we can find." That night, we gathered in the library, the air thick with tension as we spread the old texts across the table. The flickering candlelight cast shadows on the walls, giving the room an eerie atmosphere. As we delved into the texts, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were unearthing something dark, something that had been buried for far too long. "Here," Maya said, pointing to a passage in one of the books. "It speaks of a spirit known as the Keeper of the Blood Moon. It's said to protect the traditions of the village and punish those who stray from the path. What kind of punishments? Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It doesn't say, Maya replied, her face pale. But it hints at darkness, something that can consume the village if angered. We continued to read, piecing together the stories of old. The more we uncovered, the more I felt the weight of our choices pressing down on us. We had tried to break the cycle, but perhaps we had inadvertently invited the darkness back into our lives. We need to find a way to make amends, I said, my voice steady despite the fear that clawed at my insides. We must honor the keeper and acknowledge the old ways, but not through sacrifice. There has to be a different way. As we discussed our options, we stumbled upon an old legend, a challenge posed by the keeper of the blood moon. According to the tale, the keeper would appear to those who sought forgiveness, presenting them with a trial to prove their worthiness. If we can face the keeper and show our intent to honor the traditions without bloodshed, perhaps we can dispel the darkness, Elias suggested, his eyes glinting with determination. That's risky, Maya warned, her brow furrowed. What if the keeper is unforgiving? Then we face whatever comes together, I replied, feeling a surge of courage. We can't let fear dictate our actions. If we want to protect our village, we must confront the darkness. After much discussion, we agreed to face the keeper of the blood moon. We would venture into the woods on the night of the next blood moon, seeking forgiveness and a way to break the curse that hung over us. The days leading up to the blood moon were filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. The villagers sensed a shift in the air, whispers of the keeper's return circulating among them. Many were apprehensive, fearing the consequences of our decision to confront the spirit. As the night of the blood moon approached, I felt a deep sense of responsibility resting on my shoulders. If we failed, the darkness could consume us all. On the eve of the blood moon, we gathered at the altar, candles flickering in the cool night air. The villagers looked on with a mixture of hope and fear, as Elias, Maya, Liam, Sarah, and I stood before them. Tonight, we honor the blood moon, I began, my voice steady. We seek forgiveness from the keeper and wish to create a new path for our village, one that honors our traditions without sacrifice. The villagers nodded, their expressions shifting from fear to determination. As the blood moon began to rise, its crimson glow illuminating the night, we prepared ourselves for what lay ahead. As the moon reached its zenith, we felt the energy in the air shift. The forest around us became eerily quiet, the sounds of the night fading into a tense silence. Are you ready? Elias asked, his voice low as he glanced at each of us. We have to be, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. We can't turn back now. With resolve, we stepped into the darkness of the woods, the path ahead illuminated only by the glow of the blood moon. Shadows danced around us as we made our way deeper into the forest, the weight of our mission pressing down on us. As we reached the clearing, the air crackled with energy. The altar stood before us, bathed in the moonlight, and I felt a rush of emotions, fear, hope, and determination, all swirling together. Keeper of the blood moon, I called out, my voice echoing through the clearing. We come before you seeking forgiveness and a new way to honor the spirits without bloodshed. Silence enveloped us, the tension thickening as we waited. The shadows around the altar began to shift and swirl, forming a figure cloaked in darkness. The air grew colder, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The figure took shape, revealing a tall, shadowy being with glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. The keeper stood before us, an embodiment of ancient power, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. You dare disturb my realm? The keeper's voice boomed, echoing through the trees. It was deep and resonant, carrying with it the weight of ages. We seek to honor the blood moon, I replied, my voice trembling but resolute. We wish to create a new tradition, one that brings unity instead of fear. The keeper's glowing eyes narrowed, studying us closely. You wish to break the cycle of sacrifice? You are not the first to attempt this. But we can do it differently, Elias spoke up, stepping forward. We can honor the spirits without bloodshed. We can show that we respect the traditions while forging a new path. Respect must be earned, the keeper replied, its voice echoing like thunder. You must prove your worthiness. I will present you with a trial, A challenge that will test your resolve and determination. What kind of challenge? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. You must confront your fears, the keeper replied, a sinister edge creeping into its tone. Face the darkness that dwells within you. Only then will you be worthy of my mercy. As the keeper spoke, shadows began to swirl around us, enveloping us in darkness. I felt a surge of fear, but I steeled myself against it, focusing on the task at hand. Stay together, Elias whispered, grabbing my hand as the shadows began to close in. One by one, the shadows coalesced into figures from our past, memories we had long buried. I saw my younger self, terrified and alone, standing at the edge of the woods, begging to be accepted by the village. Clara, the shadow of my younger self called out, her voice a haunting echo. You abandoned us. You turned your back on the village. No, I shouted, stepping forward. I was trying to create a better future for all of us. The shadow lunged at me, but I stood my ground, feeling the warmth of my friend's presence behind me. Together, we faced our fears, confronting the darkness that threatened to consume us. As the shadows shifted and morphed, I saw each of my friends battling their own fears. Maya faced the fear of being shunned by the village, Liam confronted his doubts about his worth, and Sarah fought against the memories of loss and despair. We are stronger together, I called out, my voice echoing through the darkness. We will not let fear control us. As we stood united, the shadows began to weaken, their forms flickering as our resolve grew stronger. The keeper watched us closely, its glowing eyes observing our every move. With one final surge of determination, we joined hands, creating a circle of strength and unity. Together, we pushed back against the darkness, our combined energy illuminating the clearing with a brilliant light. The shadows dissipated, and the air grew still as the light enveloped us. The keeper stepped forward, its expression unreadable. You have faced the darkness within you and emerged stronger, it said, its voice resonating with authority. You have proven your worthiness. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, but the keeper continued. Yet, the darkness is ever present. It will return if you do not remain vigilant. Honor the blood moon, not through fear, but through unity and respect. We will, I promised, my heart swelling with hope. We will create a new tradition that honors both the past and the future. With a nod, the keeper stepped back, the shadows retreating into the forest. The darkness that had lingered began to fade, replaced by the soft glow of the blood moon above. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the villagers gathered at the edge of the clearing, their faces filled with anticipation. We emerged from the woods, exhausted but triumphant, knowing we had faced our fears and emerged victorious. Clara, Elias, you're back! Maya exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace us. What happened? A villager asked, eyes wide with curiosity. We faced the keeper, I explained, my voice steady, and we proved ourselves worthy. We will honor the blood moon through unity, not sacrifice. Cheers erupted from the crowd, a wave of relief and joy sweeping through the villagers. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over Willow Creek, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We had forged a new path, one that honored the spirits without the weight of bloodshed. In the weeks that followed, the village flourished. The darkness that had once loomed over Willow Creek faded, replaced by a sense of unity and hope. We celebrated the blood moon with joy, decorating the altar with flowers, fruits, and tokens of gratitude. The new tradition became a symbol of our resilience, a testament to our determination to face the darkness together. I felt a deep sense of belonging as I watched the villagers come together, laughter filling the air as we danced under the light of the moon. But even as we celebrated, I couldn't shake the feeling that we needed to remain vigilant. The keeper's warning echoed in my mind, a reminder that the darkness would always be waiting for a moment of weakness. As the seasons changed, so did the village. The laughter and joy returned, but I felt a lingering unease in my gut. Reports of strange occurrences began to surface once more. Whispers in the night, shadows flickering at the edges of our vision. I shared my concerns with Elias and the others, but they dismissed my fears. We faced the darkness, Clara. We have nothing to fear, Elias said, his confidence unwavering. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of something much darker. I found myself drawn back to the library, poring over the old texts, searching for answers that eluded me. One night, as I pored over a particularly ancient book, I stumbled upon a passage that sent chills down my spine. It spoke of a darkness that fed on fear, growing stronger with each act of defiance against the old ways. I felt a surge of dread wash over me. What if we haven't appeased the keeper after all? I whispered to myself, anxiety clawing at my insides. That night, I lay in bed, the shadows in my room growing darker as I tried to sleep. The whispers returned, echoing in my mind. "Clara," a voice called out, sending shivers down my spine. "You cannot escape your destiny." I bolted upright, glancing around the room, but there was no one there. My heart raced as I tried to calm myself. The following days were filled with an unsettling tension. I felt the eyes of the village upon me, the whispers growing louder. It was as if the darkness was feeding off our collective fears, growing stronger with each passing moment. As the next blood moon approached, I gathered my friends once more. "We need to confront the darkness before it consumes us," I urged, fear creeping into my voice. "We've already faced it once," Maya replied, uncertainty lacing her tone. "What if it's not as easy this time?" "We can't ignore it," I insisted, determination surging within me. "We need to unite the villagers again and face the darkness together. If we don't act, we could lose everything we fought for." After much discussion, we agreed to gather the villagers once more. It was time to confront the shadows that had begun to creep back into our lives. On the night of the blood moon, the villagers gathered at the altar, a mixture of fear and determination evident on their faces. I felt the weight of their eyes upon me as I stepped forward. "Tonight, we face the darkness that has returned," I began, my voice steady. "We must confront our fears and stand united against the shadows that threaten our village." The villagers murmured in agreement, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. "We have faced the keeper and emerged stronger," Elias added, stepping beside me. "But we cannot let our guard down. The darkness feeds on fear, and we must confront it head-on." As the blood moon rose in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the altar, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. It was time to face the darkness once and for all. With the villagers surrounding me, we ventured into the woods, the path illuminated by the glow of the blood moon. The air crackled with tension as we approached the clearing where we had faced the keeper before. "Stay close," I urged, glancing back at my friends. As we entered the clearing, the shadows began to swirl around us, forming dark figures that loomed over us. I felt my heart race as I faced the darkness once more. "Clara," a familiar voice echoed through the shadows, sending chills down my spine. "You cannot escape the darkness." "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to maintain my composure. "We are the shadows of your past, the fears you thought you had conquered," the voice replied, its tone sinister. "Face us," the shadows taunted, their forms shifting and writhing. I stood my ground, determination surging within me. "You have no power over me. I will not succumb to fear." As the shadows lunged forward, I could feel the energy of the villagers behind me, their presence strengthening my resolve. We formed a circle, hands clasped together, our combined strength pushing back against the darkness. The shadows roared in fury, but we held our ground, our voices rising in unison as we chanted a new mantra, one of unity, strength, and defiance against the darkness. With each word, the shadows began to dissipate, their forms flickering as our combined energy illuminated the clearing. The darkness that had once loomed over Willow Creek began to fade, replaced by the warmth of the blood moon above. As the final remnants of the shadows vanished, I felt a surge of relief wash over me. The keeper had tested us, but we had proven our worth once more. "We did it," Maya exclaimed, joy filling her voice. But I knew the darkness could return if we did not remain vigilant. In the days that followed, the village thrived. We honored the blood moon with joy, celebrating the strength of our community and the bonds that tied us together. But I remained vigilant, knowing that the darkness would always be lurking just outside our grasp. I shared my concerns with Elias and the others, and together we formed a council to ensure that the village remained united and strong. As the sun set on the blood moon, I felt a renewed sense of hope. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the light and create a future filled with unity and joy. The shadows may linger, but together we could face anything that came our way.